I'd like to thank everyone coming out today. This is our second session, and for those in the room, just so you're aware, we're also video recording this event, so there will be a webinar posted online later. Thanks again for coming out. This is a presentation from the BC Forest Safety Council. Myself, I'm Gino Fournier with the Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. Eventually our name's going to get so long here, I'll be here forever talking about it. So I'm part of the group that sat down with the BC Forest Safety Council on construction-initiated landslides. We have Del Ferguson here as well from Aztec, and Mike McCulley with BC Timber Sales. And also Western Forest Products was at the table, Inter4, Mark Ponting with Ponting, I believe it's Ponting Logging Constructions, road construction crew. We'll hear from Mark here pretty soon on the video. The committee has been together for the last year and a half. And we've worked on a variety of awareness training packages for construction-initiated slides. We'll start the session with a video. That'll get us started, and then Mike will come up and start on the slides.
I've got thousands and thousands of hours experience on heavy equipment, and most of my work's been done all up and down the coast, right from the Seashelt area all the way up to the mid-coast, up to Alaska. The reason we're here is to just bring to people's attention the potential and the outcome when you have a slide, and the things that happen to people's lives, and the damaged forest area and that type of thing. So I'm just going to reflect on what happened to me back years ago when I was working in the Clea Creek area. We were out at a place called Klaskino Inlet, working in a great big high cut, brand new machine, digging away, and there was some rock planes that were in there, and the top layer of rock, which was probably 20 or 30 feet, as high as the machine would reach, was rippable. And in the toe, the rock turned into a harder material which wasn't rippable, and we thought we'd probably have to bring the drill in to drill off the toe and the ditch line. This is all on about 120% side slope, and raining really heavy, torrential downpour, and water pouring out between the rock plains, brown water, which in those days, never really, and being young, never really thought too much about the consequences that could happen. Anyways, the truck driver stopped and wanted to have a coffee, but I just had this feeling that there was something wrong, and I told him not to stop. And I kept digging. I was ripping the rock. I loaded him, and he pulled out on this end hole, and I thought I felt the machine move. When in actual fact, it was the whole vertical wall was moving towards the machine, came up against the machine, and pushed me over to the edge, and then flowed around the machine, burying me in the machine. I can remember the Lexan window pushing to the inside of the cab, and water and mud starting to flow into the cab, and I could hear my old friend Henry Davidson and my old friend Troy Ogden in the background yelling at me on the radio that there was a slide coming down, and then I could hear them talking on the radio. Thought that it was the end of me because they couldn't see the machine anymore. It was completely buried under the filled trees, mud, and this rock face. I can remember, just going black and in such a panic that I was trying to dig my way out, and I was actually underground, and finally the engine stalled. But I'd managed to swing the cab to the outside and then to the inside of the cut, which created a little room between the door and the machine. The machine died because the engine, of course, was under mud and dirt, and there was no air for it to breathe. And I managed to, I was in such a panic, my adrenaline was pumping so bad, I managed, because I had swung the machine to the inside, it created a little void, and enough for me to get the door open. I opened the door and I looked up through the debris that was on top of the machine, and I could see light kind of through a tunnel with all this wood, stumps, and debris. And I actually squeezed myself up through there. I could barely get my head through, but my adrenaline was pumping so bad that I got my body through the door, out, and climbed up and up to the light, which was probably 15 or 20 feet at least, and came out on top of the slide, which was actually still moving. I could see ahead of where the machine was. The whole ground had opened up. It was like something right out of Jurassic Park. And I ran over the slide and came out the back, and my friends were, the guys that I was working with were standing on the other side of the slide, and they thought that I was dead. I just remember how I'm feeling. I just thought about my family. I thought it was the end of me there for a bit, and how I was fortunate enough to walk away from that. Anyways, that's kind of an incident that's happened to me that kind of comes to mind, and just reflecting on that, how close I was to losing my life and the effects that it would have had. So there's telltale signs like the dirty water flowing out between the rock plains. Something's happening above you. There's ground moving. The downsloping and pistol butt trees, which the geotech pointed out to me that were things to look for, the things that I look for all the time now. The rainfall guidelines are there for a reason. Adhere to them, and sometimes you got to make a decision to shut down before then. Always go to the guys that you're working with lots of experience in that, and ask them questions about what they think, and maybe your supervisor, and there are things to look for. Go by the rules for sure. And look for those telltale signs that the downsloping rock plains. They're there. The water, the amount of water that's moving along the ground, and where it's coming from.
So good morning, my name is Mike McCully. As Gino said, I'm with BC Timber Sales, same ministry as Gino, but I'm not going to say it because it's too long. I work as an engineering specialist, and I also work in the summer with the BC Wildfire Service as a communications specialist. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about construction initiated slides. We're not going to give you all the answers to the problems by any means. We're going to make you aware of what we've learned and what we've, what we've developed, but we're not going to tell you how to run your business, that's for sure. So the purpose today, again, is awareness. We're going to get you thinking a little bit about some of the issues out there and some of the problems, and hopefully, as professionals in the industry, you can take that away and apply it to your everyday business. So just before we start, a quick question. Who in the room is a registered professional of some type in some association? I think probably most will be. Okay, great. So a good chunk, just so I know who I'm talking to. Little tougher question for you. Who here in the room has been involved with a forest fatality, either through somebody they know or through your work? Yeah, and that's a striking number. That's way too many, right? So that's the reason why we're here today. I also, before we get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about Mark Ponting and his video. One of the things that we found when we were trying to find somebody to speak to us about their incident in an excavator was that there was a lot of them out there. There was all kinds of guys and girls that had been involved. Some impacted so badly that they left our industry and never came back. Some I know that have never got back in an excavator after something like that has happened to them. But the interesting part was that we had a really tough time finding somebody to stand up and tell their story like Mark did. We really appreciate what he did for us. And it speaks to one of the cultures in our industry that we really need to work on changing, and that's this, I like to call it the machismo culture. The guys were all scared to talk about what had happened in front of their coworkers. They didn't want to do it. Nobody wanted to come forward. It speaks to this notion of, being brave and showing leadership and maybe stopping work when you need to instead of just carrying on and pretending things are fine. So it's something that we noticed straight away. Everybody in the room here knows it's out there. it shouldn't be an elephant in the room, and I kind of challenge everybody here to take away that piece and work on that in your own organization. It's just a not acceptable climate where we're having people die, and that's why. So if you can think of that as we go through today, I'd appreciate that. So I'll give you a little background on what we're doing. I'll show you an outline of what it's going to look like today. As Gino said, we will take a break about halfway through. As we go through this, there will be some opportunities for questions. This presentation is broken up into several chunks, and I'd prefer if you'd sort of wait till after each little section, and then we'll have some discussion if we need to. We are looking for some feedback from you at the end of the session today as well. This isn't something we've given hundreds of times. We've done this a grand total of twice now, so please forgive us if it's not super polished. But the intent here, again, is to raise awareness on these issues, show you what we've learned, and hopefully allow you to apply it. So a little more background for us. In late 2014, the Coast Harvest Advisory Group, which consists of most major licensees on the coast, BC Timber Sales as well, noticed a trend of increase in the number of slides that we were having related to forest road construction. Just slide my pictures over here. We know these slides are costly to the environment, to people. They're costly in terms of money. So far, within our data set, there's been no significant injuries or fatalities. Those are physical injuries. But as I talked about earlier, we know that there's been some different kinds of injuries to folks that have, allowed them to not keep moving forward in our industry. But we do know that these slides are costly in many different ways. So after looking at this and realizing there's a problem, we decided to organize this group, Construction Initiated Slides Working Group, and that's the group that I'm part of. On our group, as Gino said, we have government people. Unfortunately, we're a little heavy to government today. Some of the others couldn't make it, but it's definitely an industry-led group. We also have had the good fortune of having Mark Ponting come in and look at what we're doing from a contractor perspective to make sure we're not spewing garbage or saying things that don't make sense. We really felt that was important to have a boots-on-the-ground operator, making sure what we're talking about is real. Often we get distant from the real world in our jobs. So the purpose of our group, again, was to analyze the data, look at the slides that have been happening on the coast, and try to see some of the trends, raise some of the issues, and bring those forward to you folks. So that's what we've done. We have several strategies that we're attempting to address to move forward. We have this presentation that you're looking at today. This is an awareness session for professionals. It's about 3 hours long today, just so everybody's ready for that. We also have a shorter presentation that we built specifically for operators out on the ground. It's a very simplified version of what you're going to see today. It's been out there for over a year. It's been well used and well received, and it basically shows an operator or a woods foreman or a road supervisor what to look at and how to keep himself alive, him or her, and avoid a costly and dangerous landslide. So some of the things that we learned, we solicited data from CHAG companies, Coast Harvest Advisory Group member companies, and their associates to kind of quantify this issue. We found that our initial data window was from 2012 to 2015, and we noticed that there was 36 slides. And we often get asked, well, do you think that captured all the slides? And no, we don't. We know it's not a full data set, but we don't think that's important. We weren't looking at every single slide on the coast. We weren't trying to hold people accountable. It wasn't about that. It was about gathering some data and looking at them. So, yes, it's not a complete set, but it's a pretty good set. Many of these slides did involve excavators sliding down the hill, like some of these pictures you're looking at. And there was considerable human damage, environmental costs, as we've talked about already. Some of these costs can be substantial. We know that in some cases the cost of these slides have ranged upwards of $500,000 per event. And if you think about that in terms of your own company or your contractor, that could easily bankrupt you and send you to a very dark place. So again, no fatalities, but lots of injury and lots of cost. So when we were analyzing these data, we know that we were having a lot of slides on Vancouver Island, South Coast, North Coast, Haida Gwaii, particularly in the Central Coast mainland portion. We know that there's some different soil types out in there, which Del's going to talk about a little bit later. There's many different factors that affect these slides. These are some of the ones that we've grouped up. Obviously, water, soil, bedrock, planning. Unknown condition is a big one. We're going to talk about that today a lot. What we mean by that is what you can't see when you're doing your planning that you do see when you dig into the ground. So we all know what that looks like. Ground looks good. Dell might think there's rock in there, but until you really dig in, what do you see? So what we're going to talk about is what do you do when you find that? What's the process that you should think about undertaking so that you can avoid a slide? The goal of our group is try to understand these, recognize the indicators, and we have a very aggressive goal. We'd like to eliminate all landslides on the coast. That's where we're at. We know that weather is a big deal. Operator competency. We have an awful lot of young operators out there. It seems you're either really young or really old right now, so it's very important to, there's not a lot of in-between in our industry, and that's an important factor. We don't want to have our very young, inexperienced people working on the toughest ground, so something to think about when you're out there doing your planning. And, of course, production pressure, and that's a big one. I've talked about it a little bit already in terms of the culture of not speaking up when things are unsafe. Production pressure factors into that equation as well. So here's the format for today. I don't know why those check marks are blinking. We're through the first two sections already is the great news for you. We're going to go through a few case studies now. I'm going to show you what a couple of the landslides that we've analyzed look like. We're going to talk very briefly about general safety and some of the regulations. We're going to talk about communications, which are very important in our industry, the plan, and then I'm going to turn it over to Del and Gino at that point, and we'll take a little break partway through. So again, after each section, if you have some questions, we can have a little bit of discussion on that. We good to go? Okay. Good, guys? Yeah. Right. All right, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a case study here. This is case study 1, and the point of these is to show you what can go wrong, and we also have a case study that's going to show you what can go well as well. So this is a case study from Yo Island. This is in my operating area. Yo Island is up in the Central Coast, for those that don't know, not too far from Bella Bella. Operator here was entering an end haul section. He was entering the end haul section, and he was in a transition zone, and it's another very important piece to think about as we talk today. Moderate to steep ground, we're talking 45 to 50% slope transitioning into the end haul. And he encountered a pocket of subsurface water and some deep organics. There was actually water piping out of the ground about the size of a garden hose. So this was very dry. It was the middle of summer. It was a drought season. There was no rain. There hadn't been for a long time. It was nothing that you would pick up in any assessment or any planning thing that you would have done. It would have been very hard to tell that water was there. The excavator operator chose to move out onto some goop. He didn't keep his feet on solid ground. He thought he would sneak around, get ahead a little bit, and he was not on solid bedrock. He chose not to remove the organics off top of the bedrock. He was going to keep moving for all the reasons that you would think. And this was the result. The hoe was not on stable ground, and he ended up down the hill. It gives you a little better perspective of where that excavator stopped. And this slide actually goes probably about another 50% down below where you can't see. So really fortunate that machine stopped where it did and flopped over on its side. The operator was able to crawl out of that machine and scamper up to the top of the road. As far as I know, the fella who was in this machine that day, he left the work site that day and never came back. He never went back to work in an excavator. It impacted him fairly significantly. At this point, we had to bring out a fair jag of people like myself. We had WorkSafe come out. We had geoscientists come to have a look and see what we could do about this. So the result of that decision to move forward onto the organics over bedrock ended up in an expensive, costly slide that caused some damage and impacted a human being quite significantly. So this is the cost. We're going to talk dollars for a minute. I won't go through them all, but clearly they're significant. I will tell you that these costs were verified by the contractor, so they're real. I had a second contractor have a look at them just to make sure they made sense, and he thought they were a little bit on the low side, to be frank. We lost some harvest opportunities going forward due to unknown condition. We ended up removing a bunch of timber out of some of our blocks. We had to fly in and out of this work site to do these investigations. It was very expensive. We had a lot of professionals coming and going, lots of transportation costs. So in the end, we actually had to build a tote road down to get that machine and get it out of that site. And $549,000 later, this slide was a done deal. So if you think about that again in the context of your own company, and I'm going to ask you, through my discussion, I'm going to ask you all to think very personally about your role and what you would do in your organization, your business. What change would you make? What could you do every day to help avoid this kind of situation? So just think of those things. These were some of the factors that we believe were a factor in this particular slide. The main one, though, was not following the plan, which we would call operator error. They just, the prescriptions were there. They should have stopped, dug down to bedrock, got themselves on solid ground. They chose not to do that. Also, the unknown condition of water coming out of the soil. And what do you do at that point? In our package that we build for operators, we spend an awful lot of time trying to convince them by using these examples that the right thing to do is to stop. Everybody's out there to make money. There's a lot of production pressure, but if you don't stop, you could end up costing yourself a whole lot more money than if you did stop and get some help. So that's one of the themes in the operator package. It's a theme here as well. So we don't talk a lot about all of the factors, but we have identified them, and we want you to think about what those might look like in your world. And I guess the main message there would be that there can be many different factors that cause a landslide. There's not usually just one thing, is a theme that we've noticed. So here's a little better story for you. This slide occurred in Holberg. This again, Holberg is on the north tip of Vancouver Island, close to Port Hardy, for those that don't know. This operator was working in a conventional construction section, again, transitioning out of an end haul piece. The ground was about the same, 45-50% slope. The operator at this road heading noticed a different change, though. He noticed that he had come through some bedrock and he had encountered a deep pocket of organics. Again, very dry. I was here. I investigated this slide. This is one of the drier seasons I remember in my backyard in my 22 years up there. There was no water on the ground anywhere, yet he dug into this deep pocket of goop and it was pretty wet. So the good story is the operator stopped working and he called me and he said, "Hey, Mike, I've got something that looks a little different here and I think I need to move my road uphill a bit. We want to do some extra end haul, and yeah, it's going to cost a little more money, but we think that there's some issues here that could cause us a landslide or something else catastrophic." So we went out and had a look, and on the operator's advice, we chose to move the road uphill a little bit. And I want to just mention to you that one of the things I take out in the field every day when I go is I try to treat these operators as professionals, because they are. They know what they're doing. They've been doing it a long time. I think when we disregard those phone calls that come in and we don't really encourage them to speak up to us, we're doing ourselves a disservice. They're professional operators and they deserve the credit for that, and they deserve to be listened to. So we went out on the site, we moved the road uphill a little bit, we authorized some more end haul, it cost some more money, and we still had a slide. So why would I throw this up and say, well, this is a great news story? The good news story is that the slide was a lot smaller than it could have been. The slide ended up being about a half a hectare total. There wasn't a lot of timber involved, although there was some. Nobody was hurt. No machine went down the hill. And they were able to get back to work pretty quick. It wasn't a huge deal in the big scheme of things. Most importantly, nobody was injured. But the key factor here was that the fellow had stopped and come in and asked to do things a little bit different, and then we listened to him and we took his advice. This slide's a little tricky to look at. It's a bunch of pictures taped together, but it shows you, if you can read that, where the operator was sitting in his machine when the slide happened. And I still believe that if we would have been out a little further on the original center line, he absolutely would have been down at the bottom of the hill, piled up in his machine at the end of the day. So, this is a demonstration how close he came to being impacted. But again, because of his action and because of the fact that he spoke up and we listened to him, we think that we probably had a better case scenario than we could have seen out here. This picture just shows that there had been a little bit of rain, but this was the post-slide assessment concluded that it was just a wet area, a pocket of goop up in between some rock that you would have never known as wet. There are some indicators in there for those that know their plants, and Dell's going to touch on that a little bit later as well. you know, one of the other things that we were dealing with on this site is rainfall shutdown, and we're going to talk about that later too. Just a lot of discussion about when to dump your rain gauge, what was the right thing to do. There had been a bit of rain a few days earlier, but really nothing significant. Again, it wasn't even enough to keep the dust down. So just goes to show you what you can run into. This is a rock heading, and that's what we encountered. So this is the heading into the block. The slide wasn't very big, and it was a switchback just past here. So the crew was actually trapped in behind this for a bit of time. But again, because they had been proactive, it was a fairly small impact. They were able to dig themselves out. You know, when I went out there, I drove in and out of this road all the time. I was driving through that, and I thought of myself and my family and my workers that were out on site. And pretty fortunate that nobody was coming and going when this happened, but that's their escape route in and out. So other things to think of are impacts that you're leaving for other phases and other people out on the setting. So again, just a bit of review on the case study section. You know, I know that you're here because you've been involved with these before, or you have an interest to help prevent them. So has your organization had incidents like this? I know mine has, a lot of them. What could have been done to prevent them? Just things to think about here. And what's your professional role here? Again, we're not going to stand up here today and give you a bunch of procedures and answers and methods on how to go back and do your business. But what we'd really like you to do as professionals, you know, think about what change you can make in your organization every day. What can you do in your business? What leadership can you show to help prevent these incidents? Any questions on the case study section before we keep moving? Everybody happy so far? Making sense? Good to go?
Was there any side casting at all, or was it all end-haul?
Sorry, on the
Holberg one?
Yeah.
Was he side casting at all, or was it all end-haul as he transitioned in there?
In the transition section, there was some side cast, but it wasn't that issue. The issue was that the rock just wasn't there. So in the end, we were side casting a lot less because of the fact that he had come forward and said, this isn't good. You know, these guys work out there for 30 years, and he could tell by the color of the clay, I believe, that I'm going to have a problem. So there was some side cast going on in the transition zone for sure. But you know, as we know, transition zone is a piece that you have to be transitioning, and you can't get to your end haul section and then start transitioning. Transition zone is for transition. By the time you hit your end haul section, you need to be in full bench. And that's sort of the message there. Make sense? Yeah. Okay. All right, a little bit on general safety now. So, safety of everybody is obviously paramount. Everybody has an impact on the culture of safety, right? We have this little key message that we've developed, and it's called RADAR. Recognize the risk, assess the situation, develop a solution, act safely to fix a problem, and report the upset condition. Very important that you're talking to folks, and I'm going to get into communication a little bit later. One of the things that we do note as well here is that people get really focused on their own phase. So if you're road building, you're really focused on road building, and you're thinking only about the hazards you're creating for other road builders. But you know, you need to think about the other phases as well, what you're leaving behind. Just like a faller would when he's falling a block, he's got to worry about the other fallers coming in behind him or the other operators. It's the same thing for road building. What hazard are you leaving behind for the next group? Again, be aware of other phases. Please talk to people. If you see this, don't just go home and don't say anything. Make sure you're passing that up and down the food chain so that people can adjust and adapt accordingly. Don't create hazards for others. Again, here you see some timber decked up on the side of the road. That's where the road builder put it. Is that the best place for it? Probably not. These can be the end results. Pass along what you know. It's very important. All right, this one's a beauty. I get a little blowback on this one sometimes. So one of the things that we're learning in safety, and I'm sure some of you are very well studied in this field, much more so than I am, is that, you know, safety, we get caught up in saying that safety is a top priority. And we've kind of made a pact on our group that we're not going to use that terminology because really it isn't. Business is the top priority. And I know when I say that I often rub people the wrong way, but it's true. If you are going to run a successful business, though, safety needs to be one of your most important business processes. If you can think of safety as a piece of your business that you're doing every day, rather than just thinking of it as something that's over here that people tell me I need to focus on and make sure it's important, but oh my gosh, when something comes up, holy, that's another piece of work I have to do that day. That's where we're losing. We really need to think about safety in terms of our business. If you effectively manage safety, you will save money. Ultimately, that's why people are doing the work that they're doing. Yeah, not everybody likes to hear it, but it's a fact. And if we take that approach and we think about safety as a process in your business rather than just another thing off to the side, and probably the most important process. You've seen the numbers on the landslides. The cases are clear. If you are safe, you will save money. And that's the bottom line, to be frank. It seems to get a little more attention than just saying safety is the top priority. And it's true and it's real. So this model talks about that a little bit. This is called the Swiss cheese model. And what we're talking about here is that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you try to build a really good safety system into your business, you can still have failures. If you have... the Swiss cheese model here shows us that no matter how many checks and balances we have in play, if we have a series of failures and the holes all line up, you can end up with an incident. In terms of our business, you might have really good toolbox meetings every day as one layer, and you may have an excellent training program for your operators as another layer. Great machine maintenance as the third layer, and a good inspector, a good road foreman as the next layer. But one day somebody doesn't make the safety meeting or the maintenance isn't quite right, and those things go wrong and line up, you can have these types of losses. So that's the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. It's just something to think about. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you could still have incidents. So again, key discussion points here. How well does your organization address these personal safety issues? Just a bit of time to reflect on your job and what you do out there every day. How could you improve it within your own shop? And what's your role as a professional in terms of safety within your own organization? Any questions on that section? Fairly short, fairly brief. We're not going to talk in great detail about personal safety, but just some ideas for you. Okay, good? All right. So every employer must ensure the health and safety of all workers in the workplace. That's the law. We all know it. Now we have to try to live it. These are some of the regulations. We're not going to go through these, but we put them up there to show you that they're out there and you have to follow them, and they are important, and it's the law. Some of the obligations that you folks have under safety are through your professional associations as well. So there's lots of guidelines that our associations have established to help us on steep slopes, help us on stream crossings, help us do road construction, and those are there for a reason, and they're there to, manage these issues. These are some of those guidelines. We have terrain stability in the forest sector, professional services in the forest sector for crossings and roads, and also terrain stability assessment. So these are the things that you need to be aware of as a professional. I'm sure you all are. You have some responsibility here to also show leadership as a professional. I often ask people, again, to think about how you would do things different in your organization to make some changes and follow along with these issues. One of the pieces, again, there's this culture of don't say anything, just keep working, and it's really important that we get production today, but we've shown you what that can cost you, and we're asking you to take a little bit of a different approach. Just think about that every day when you're out there working. What could we do different? What is the real cause of pushing forward to gain a little production? Okay, my favorite section. Communication. That's Gino and me talking. I live in Nanaimo, or McNeil, and he's in Nanaimo. So that's how we communicate. All right, communication. What is communication? Very important to help keep people safe, particularly around construction-initiated slides. Two-way. I'm going to key in on the bold stuff because that's why it's bold. It's really important. It's a two-way process. Mutual understanding. Exchange of ideas, news, and feelings. And the bottom bullet I really believe in, an organization cannot operate without communication between levels, departments, and employees. Cannot operate. And that's a fact for sure. Two-way means listening and talking, and we're gonna get into that a little bit here. It's not just telling people things, it's listening to what they have to say and having an understanding, mutual understanding, two-way process. Communication can come in many forms. It can be verbal, written, visual, kind of like this presentation you're looking at today. Communication can happen in groups or in individuals. Some examples obviously are your pre-work meetings that you have every day, daily safety briefings, planning meetings that you may or may not be having, during and after operations, but importantly all day, every day. And I want to talk about two of these slides right here. We get some questions about this one right here. People always say, why'd you put data there? That doesn't look really safe, and what's going on? But you know, that's reality. That's the work that's going on out in the bush. I think the picture doesn't do it justice. I think there's lots of clearance here. But what we do like here is that this person is where they're supposed to be. They can be seen. That's the work that's going on, so we're not going to hide that. That's what's happening out in the woods. This picture up here is interesting because these folks are using hand signals, you know, between the excavator operator and that person on the ground. But how many people really know what all those things mean? I mean, I go out on a work site when we're putting a bridge in and people are doing this and they're spooling around and doing that. But do you understand what they mean? And does the operator understand it? Is that really working? Or is it just the boss down and they're going, you know, spool down, knuckle in? I don't know. But very important, and it's also another way of communicating by hand signal. One of the very important things to note, though, is when you're communicating, everybody communicates a little bit differently. Today, you're getting a bit of a lecture from us in front of a room. That's you know, one way of communicating in a group. Lots of folks don't like that. So when I have safety toolbox meetings, I make sure everybody knows that if you've got anything to say, you can talk to me alone in a group. You can email me, you can phone me, but I really want to hear from you. I want to make sure that every individual on my team knows that there's many ways to talk to me. When we have a toolbox and we tell everybody, get out to work today, and we're way behind, so hurry up, any questions? I mean, are we really doing any favors to ourselves or our workers in terms of safety? Are we giving them an option to come forward? And when they do come and talk to you and somebody says, hey, I think I see something that's not safe, and you go, oh my God, now I got to deal with that today. Is that good communication? Are we helping people to feel open and feel able to come and talk to you? I don't think we are. So think of those things when you're having those meetings and when you're talking to folks. Make sure you're helping people feel comfortable to communicate back to you, and then you're listening to them. This speaks to that a little bit. Communication must be effective and timely. Don't wait to talk to folks. If you see something wrong, let them know very quickly. Communication must be inclusive. You have to talk to everybody and you have to listen to everybody. You have to have that two-way mutual understanding. Open and honest and respectful. And I really go back to the respectful part. When we are preaching to operators how to do their business and what to do out there, and part of that's our job. If you're a woods foreman or a planner, you have to discharge your obligations and you have to let people know what's going on. But if you do that, there's lots of ways to do that. If you do that in a very polite and respectful manner and you ask for their input and you believe in them, and you take their feedback to heart and you learn from it. I mean, those are professional operators out on the ground. There's lots to learn from them. If we treat people with respect, I think they're way more apt to come and talk to you, which leads to a better environment. Listen, understand, and contribute. I tell a story here about a road show that I was on, again, up in the Central Coast, and I went out one day and they were blasting, and they had done some over blasting, whatever that really is, we're not sure, but there was some rock off in the bush, and I went up to the blaster and I said, hey, why did you do that? You've obviously done something wrong here. You've blasted and there's rock all over the place. And man, I got told really quickly how he felt about me. He didn't like that at all. He called me on it, and I was glad he did. He said, look, you're not a blaster and you're not a driller. How on earth, how dare you tell me how to do my job every day? And he got it back in the excavator, and he was so angry that I actually had to go down to the road foreman and ask him to remove the guy from the machine for the day. I felt really bad about it. And I went home and I thought about that. And when you roll out on a road setting or into a cut block, whether you're wearing a government logo like I do, or your company logo on your hard hat, or if you're with WorkSafe or another organization, I mean, you're a very intimidating figure for those operators. Believe me, they don't want you there. They're thinking of you. And if we take a little bit of a different approach, and again, we respect them and we treat them like experts that they are, I think we're going to have a better place. In hindsight, what I should have done was ask the guy to teach me a little bit about blasting and drilling, and maybe, learned a bit, taught him a bit, had a discussion. But instead, I pissed the guy off very badly, and I put him back in a machine, and he just wasn't focused. We need these people out there focused on what they're doing every day. It's intense work and it's hard. They have to be paying attention. They can't be upset because the area foreman's on the show today. I talked to some of my tree falling friends, and they tell me that the most unsafe days they have in the bush are when WorkSafe shows up, because they're not thinking about what they do every day, and they're not thinking about their coworkers. So it's no different when you come out there wearing your corporate logo. You are an authority figure when you go out on site, and just try to remember that. Take a soft approach would be my advice, and work with folks, ask them for input, and I think we'll do a lot better there. Does that make sense? Seem reasonable? Again, really important to show leadership here and foster a culture of open communication. When you go back to work, think about those things that we've talked about this morning. How do we change that notion that it's not okay to speak up and say that things are unsafe? How do we encourage people to stop work on a road show if they're seeing an unsafe condition? How do we do that? How are you going to do that in your job each day? And I challenge you all in this room as leaders and professionals to do that. It's the only way we're going to make a change. You really have to go back. Again, we're not here to tell you how to do that, but when you go back to your own operation, think about what that looks like for you every day. How are you treating people, and how are you going to encourage them to come forward with the hazard? Not sweat so much about the money and the production. That's really what we're talking about. Ask people for their opinions. Listen to everybody. Adjust accordingly. And don't minimize concerns. Again, if somebody comes forward and says they have a problem and you roll your eyes at them, you're probably not helping the situation. You're probably putting a lot of pressure on that person, making them feel that they have to go back to work when maybe they shouldn't. Do some follow-up, after you do a road show. Make sure you're doing this. What went well? What went poorly? How could we do better next time? Ask these questions. If you are an open communicator and you're genuine and you show a bit of empathy, people will talk to you, and you will learn from that, and you will be able to do a better job the next time. Very important. Close the loop between the planners and the designers, the implementers, all phases in between, and learn and adjust going forward. A road project is a very complex beast. There's all kinds of people involved with it at all levels. You start with the layout person. Maybe even before that, somebody was looking at a map or an air photo or LiDAR these days. Then you have your planners that design the road. Maybe people doing appraisals that make some changes. Beyond that, you're implementing the road. You've got people like Dell out there looking at the ground. Many, many people looking at a road show. So it's really important to make sure that you're fostering that open culture of communication all the way through. Be assured that effective communication is, if you're a professional in one of these two associations, and I don't think it's called APEG anymore. What do you call it now, Dell? AG BC? AG BC? Okay. Engineers, geoscientists, the BC. It is an obligation of your guidelines that you effectively communicate. So you need to go and think about what that looks like and how are you going to implement that. But be assured it's part of your job, and it's very important. Effective and timely communications. Timely. All right, during a road project, when do you ask for help or advice? Don't wait till it's too late to ask for help. If you're unsure of something, it probably means you need to stop and have a look at things. If you're out there running a road show and some of the ground doesn't look right, and in your mind you're going, should I carry on? Should we stop? Probably a really good indicator that you need to stop and have a look. Bring in some help. Bring in somebody to have another look, make an assessment. And again, our message is, going forward without doing that can be catastrophic and very expensive. Sometimes it's hard to ask for help, and we know this. We know that people have a hard time coming forward and saying, geez, I'm not sure about this, or maybe I need to do something a little different here. Again, I challenge you all in this room to go back and try to change that culture a little bit. Make people feel that they can come forward. If you're, it can be very humiliating to ask for help. If you're a 35-year road foreman or a 25-year excavator operator, boy, the last thing you want to do out in macho land out there is stop and tell people, oh man, I might not know what I'm doing right now. I might need some help. Really, really hard to do. So we need to find a way to encourage folks to come forward and do that a little bit differently. And you folks in this room as leaders, it's up to you to find a way to do that. So I challenge you to go back and think about what that looks like in your own shop. Don't put yourself in a position where you wish you would have stopped and asked for help or done something different. Think of how you would feel if an injury occurred that could have been avoided if you were talking or stopping or asking for help. No regrets, right? Don't go home at the end of the day and wish you would have. Again, we've all known people or been involved with fatalities and injuries in the forest industry, and I don't want anybody in this room to go home at the end of the day and wish they would have done something a little different. So in summary, communication is two ways. It occurs in many forms, which we've talked about. It's got to be timely and respectful. Show some leadership in fostering that open culture of discussion and allowing people the avenue to come forward. Be an active listener. Make sure when people come, you're listening. It's not easy when you're busy and somebody comes forward and you've got a million things on the go, but you really need to focus on listening to folks and understanding what they're saying. Very important. Communicate your feedback and close the loop, kind of like a continuous improvement process, no different. And if things don't seem right, speak up and say so. It's very important. Doing nothing is not an option. 36 landslides in 3 years is what we're looking at. So, any questions on communication? Thoughts? That's a deep one, eh? Okay. This is my last section. Fortunately for you folks, we're going to talk a little bit about the plan. We will get into more detail in terms of planning when Del and Gino speak a little bit later on. So this is a bit of an overview on what the plan, how the plan works with the road project and what your role might be. It's a very comprehensive process, as we've talked about earlier. The plan is there to ensure that the construction meets the objectives. So you're trying to log a block, you need to build a road. You have to make a plan to do that. You've got all these different layers involved with the planning. You've got engineers, geotechs, people reviewing the plan, and you've got a pre-work, construction phases, and then an as-built, and many other things in between. So as you can see, it's complicated. It's not real simple. And each organization has a little different flow there. If you're using contractors, there might be another layer, whereas if you're using your own in-house equipment operators, it might be a little cleaner. So it's important to do some pre-field planning, obviously, determine your objectives. What are you trying to achieve? Where are you trying to get to? Trying to harvest timber, you need to build a road. So how are you going to get there? Is it long-term road or is it short-term road? What can we do different if it's one versus the other? Are there other users on the road? What's the timing of our road? How are we going to use it? One of the things I think we get caught in sometimes is we are maybe laying out a block for a grapple setting and that's all that's in our mind. Like, that's the only way to do this, so we have to make our road fit that type of harvesting. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's time to step back and challenge that a little. Gee whiz, I just can't make a road work for that. Is there a different way? Sometimes backing up and asking another question. Can we do something a little bit different? Like, don't get stuck in a box of thinking there's only one way to go and only one process to do. There's lots of alternatives out there. Make sure you get it right at the front end, not at the back end. Again, do your pre-field planning. Review what's out there. There's all kinds of tools now. We have Google Earth, LiDAR, many different things. There's higher level plans, watershed assessments, terrain class, biodiversity reports, fish habitat assessments. Think of all those in your planning. This isn't news to most of you in the room. This is just stuff that you do. Use your local knowledge. Learn what's out there from other folks. Look around at other blocks. Look at the road openings that you can see before you put a new road in. What does the rock look like? What does the soil look like? It's probably a very good indicator of what you're going to see where you're working. Look for your rock hardness and formations. What past issues have there been? Talk to folks that have built road in those drainages before. Talk to the operators. Those folks know what's going on out there. Do your learning. What's the weather like in the drainage? Should you have a specific drainage-specific rainfall shutdown guidelines. Sometimes we need to do that. I know within my operating area, we work on North Vancouver Island, we work on the east side and the west side, a lot of the Gulf Islands, and on the central and mid-coast all the way, quite far north of Bella Bella. Very broad range in what the weather does out there, right? Some areas are dry, some are wet, some have different soil types. So think about that a little bit. Don't just get caught up in a corporate rainfall shutdown it is what it is because somebody said it was. We've actually used FP Innovations to help us develop some drainage-specific rainfall shutdown guidelines that we follow. And also, think about how are your rainfall shutdown guidelines being applied? When are you emptying the rain gauge? Are you doing it in the morning? Are you doing it at night? What makes sense? Are you doing it because somebody gave you an SOP and said this is how you do it? Think about those things. Make the change if you need to. Here's your field and recce options. Just make sure you're looking at everything. Don't rush through this. It's important. If you're on steep ground in the Central Coast and you know that there's been landslides all around you, why on earth would you skip the grade line process? Doesn't make any sense to me, right? If we're having landslides out there, we need to pay some attention to these things. Spend the right amount of time at the front end as a coordinating professional. Do your reconnaissance, as I've talked about. Don't just find a quick route and assume it's the best. Find all the control points. And I'm expecting people in here know what that means. Is it in the right spot? What other options exist? Take notes. Learn from what you see. What areas of concern are noted and investigated? What professionals have we brought in to have a look at these things? So again, you get the message here. Spend a little extra time at the front end. And don't get caught in a box of this is how it's always been done. Make your own path. Show some leadership. Oh, Gino, what did I do? So my last slide, key messages. Road locations, address present and future plans. Make sure you're following the guidelines and following legislation. Examine all your options. Learn from what's around you. Look at the field observations, data collection, and look at the potential hazards and risks and just spend a bit of time on this. It's really, really important. If we get it right at the front end, we should have a good result at the back end. That's it for me. Any questions on anything, any discussion, anything I've missed that somebody else would like to bring forward? We're ears wide open here, folks. So, yes?
One thing you said in the last one, 2 slides back, rock is stable. I've been doing a lot of work recently in Alberta and Saskatchewan. An awful lot of landslides are moving in the rock. So that's maybe a flaw of something in some places.
Absolutely, and Dell's going to talk a little bit about some of the rock indicators and exactly what you're talking about, why it's not that simple. I mean, what we were getting at here was basically looking for control points and noting a difference between between the rock and the fall of soil, for lack of a better term, that's really goopy stuff that we see on the Central Coast. I mean, we know that there's a problem there. We know that we're into that ground more commonly than we used to be. We're up a little higher. I know that in my business area, when the markets are really good, we're doing an awful lot of work up in the Central Coast, and you have to be aware of it. We see a trend in the slide data. We know that when markets are good, people move north to harvest. We have more landslides. So, it's a factor for sure, just knowing where you are and where you're not going to be. I know that when the market took a turn a while ago, nobody operated in that part of the world for quite a while. Well, landslides went down, right? But once you go back up in there, you know what you're getting into. We know there's problems. So, thank you. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
In your case study for Holberg,
Yeah.
Was there any way to avoid that slide? Did it like a different plan or anything?
Well, we thought we had. We honestly thought if we moved in slope a little bit and end haul a bit more, we were doing the best thing we could at the time to avoid the slide. The road heading was pretty close to the height of land. Like, there was really not much catchment. There wasn't a big watershed up there. It was a bit of a shocker. So even when we did that, we felt that we were doing what we could to avoid a slide. And I'm glad you raised that, because the message there is sometimes no matter what you do, you're going to have a slide. These things are going to happen. The question is, are you minimizing it? Are you mitigating it as best you can, minimizing the risk, and especially minimizing the risk to the workers and the people, right? So, we thought we'd done that. We thought the new heading looked good. We felt that we were going to be okay, and we still had a slide. So it can happen, and it's going to keep happening. Question is, can we keep them small, keep people safe? Make sense? Yeah.
Again, on that Holberg slide, did any of the road design or the profiles even indicate anything?
In terms of the...
Looking at the pictures, we lay out road through stuff like that all the time. It did not look, from physically looking at it, did not look at any real indicators.
No, there was a few that Dell's going to talk about. We noted them after. There was some fern and some plant types that might have showed, but really one of the other things we've learned, and for those at Bill Road, I apologize if this is basic info, but obviously you've got where we're seeing these pockets of goop between bedrock points. So you know you're working through rock, and then all of a sudden you hit this goop. Does your road go way in and out? Why is it there? We know that they're wetter, though. We know that the bedrock is funneling water down into those areas. So yeah, you wouldn't have really seen it. It was rock-controlled area, we thought. But we also, talking to the operator afterwards, he said, well, man, I work out here all the time. We always see these pockets between the rocks. So he had a better indicator of that than probably any geoscientist would have, because he's worked there for all his life, and he knew what the clay would be like, and he knew what he was going to see. So that's why when the guy came in, I felt it really important we listened to him. I mean, it would have been pretty easy to say, going to get a budget approval, and I work in government, so those things aren't very slick processes. They're very daunting. You could get caught up in that and say, gee whiz, I'm not doing that, just carry on, we'll take our chances, because it's hard. And it was extra work, but I think that listening to that guy was a good thing. And certainly, you're right, they weren't there. You couldn't have seen it other than a few plant types in the end. So. Okay. Well, that's it for me. Thanks for listening to me. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you can take home a little bit and apply it to what you're doing every day. And I apologize if I've challenged people directly too much, but I believe very strongly in what I'm talking about here. And I have not yet had to go investigate a fatality, and I never want to, and I hope none of you ever have to as well. So thanks again. We'll turn it over to Del. We'll just take a minute.
Yeah, so that's, there is that. We've been working on this for 3 years now, I think. Damn near. So, and we've got a lot of input back from CHAG and CHAG members. We gave a big talk about a year ago up in Campbell River, and there was a packed house, and got a lot of really good feedback on how to get this a little bit more interesting. Some of these PowerPoints can just be deadly. So hopefully we're going to keep you awake this morning. Soils and terrain. So this is what I do for a living, or not for a living, I don't know. So what I do is we look for indicators when we go out as terrain people. Most companies get us out and have a look at stuff. Sometimes it's after a slide. Most of the time it's before. This is during layout, sometimes pre-layout, and sometimes after everything's been laid out, in which case we give our opinion on how this road can be constructed. Here we see a lot of examples here on this slope where you got extensive deer fern. I'm not saying deer fern's bad in every case, but there's an extensive slope of deer fern. We've got some soil, what I call soil map parting here, and you can see that just by the slopes. There's exposed mineral soils, along a gap. And also you got a little bit of pistol budding, not a lot of mature trees on there, so the trees are trying to grow, but definitely things have not been successful in growing for a long period of time. Here's another example, seepage and wet soils, deformed trees. So you're getting some pistol budding in some of these, and you're getting some jackstrawing, or like a drunken forest. Just an indicator, a lot of wet site indicators on the ground there. And here we got some organics over bedrock, pond water. So this is a typical road heading, and I think in this case we're just coming out of solid bedrock. And here we've got a pocket of dirt again, and it's starting to pond. We've got all kinds of drilling and blasting. The first thing we want to do here is put puncheon down so we can just move ahead, but not the time. Just keep into that slope and keep things going with that kind of heading, because we're still above steep slopes there. All right, so it, all kinds of indicators. Sediment layers, this is a good one to remember. 1 bucket of mud mixed with 5 buckets of gravel or sand equals 6 buckets of mud. I think we pulled this out for the Interfor 2006 transition zone thing, and it sort of stuck with people. Like, so if you just got, you got all kinds of sand, but you just happen to have a bucket of organics with that, you mix it, you got nothing but mud anyway. So, yeah, don't go fooling around. Make sure all that stripping's done and that organic soil or wet soil, mucky soil is removed from the heading. This guy wasn't quite so lucky. Again, there's indications of, you've got some creep. You got some slope movement there, right? So you got a fairly steep slope and things are pushing down on that slope. The trees are not going straight up and down. Definitely not a really good spot to put a road. Sometimes we can heli these, heli retention or whatever, but not a great spot to put a road. If we can get it down onto a bench, it would be much better than cutting into this stuff. Jackstraw trees. In this instance, I was called up to, it was like a 400-meter long slide up in the mid-coast. And so it was generated on lower slopes, probably about 45% slopes. And the hole went down quite a fair ways. It went down the full 400 meters past several road headings. Anyway, it was noted that it started in seepages like this one, and this is a seepage, and this is, you got indications of things it's a drunken forest is what I call it, right? Too much to drink. So they're sitting back on each other, they're going forward, wherever. So what we did is we decided to pull them back into the hillside. So we reran the road heading up around to switch back and kept them in, and then put a whole bunch of full bench and tall sections in around these seepages. Well, it worked for a while until he started putting punching on slope instead of full benching. But anyway, we had a second slide that started in this kind of hardpan stuff, which was indicative of that seepage on the slide before. So basically the water's running right over surface, isn't going through those soils. Bam, over he goes. Took the punching out, and this time the hole only went down 10 meters, but it shook up the whole crew. So, and it stopped work for a long time. Some of the road heading beyond had to move to heli, and we had to reorganize the whole thing. Rock instability is a big one. We usually like rock out there, right? But sometimes it gets a little bit much. That slip plane you see there, that smooth slip plane, is actually about 20 meters high. And this rock fall that came out from it extended down about 40 meters. So this was a road heading going through here, right through where the rubble's going on the front of the slide here. And then we were looking at carrying that road through for another, it was probably about half a kilometer. But we had to deal with this rock coming right down at us for 200 meters or so. It was effectively decided to stop the road. The volumes were just too much. We had no place to put it. We tried road options going up, road options going down, and couldn't get through. So it kind of kiboshed the whole planning. A lot of that had to be switched to heli, and then we did get some roads down below to get some of the flatter bench stuff. But it's stuff you got to really look out for. This wasn't noted in the original terrain report, but once we got the road heading in there, we noticed that we got all this really steep, what we call dip slope fracture sets, and causing nothing but pain. Nice to be able to use rock, but if you've got some really high cuts, you're not going to get through that without some major retention works. Again, here's a look at some fracture bedrock, evidence of instability. In this particular case, there was a landslide that occurred just before this slope, and they were putting a road through. So they stopped and called us in, and we had a look at this slope coming up ahead and determined that, yeah, no, let's not put the road through there. The road would have been about 10 meters down below this, but we had evidence of fresh rockfall coming, hitting the trees. Again, the trees are all pretty much young and nothing's growing on slope. So they did, we stopped the road. We decided, let's go down and around onto a lower bench. And what we did, and we could get most of the conventional harvest that way. But it was 2 weeks later this slid. So yeah, it does show you that, yeah, it's when you see signs like this, stuff's happening. You know, you're on 70, 80% slopes there with 100% above for probably 20, 30 meter bluffs. Yeah. Organics. The slide on the left here is basically it's a slide that started with a stump pull. The yarder was actually tied to a stump and pulling down, and a tree that got caught ended up banging a stump, and this is about 45, 50% slopes, mind you. Mid-coast, skunk cabbage on slope. So it ended up in that little, breaking a pocket of organics with skunk cabbage in it, breaking it open. The yarder operator said that it was just a little trickle coming down the hill, right? Just trickling. And all of a sudden, it dropped over a 10-meter bluff set and just came down in a roar and filled him right up to the bottom of the yarder. So, and it pushed him back a meter. So that's how, these things are pretty strong when you get, and that's, we're talking, maybe half a meter thick sediment, but once it gets down to the bottom, I mean, you got a whole pile of woody debris and stuff, so yeah, stuff to watch out for. The one on the right, that's a road heading that is basically on a bench. Yeah, we're breaking into an old deposition zone with organics, but it's stable, right? But it's not a big deal, but if you were to hit something like that on a slope, it's going to probably come down at you, so. We really watch out, for if our cut slopes are any more than 70%, we really got to think about what kind of material's in that. Anybody can break in with news if they want to. I don't mind, Again, here, wet site indicators, going through fairly steep road heading, but we thought we were in basic volcanic bedrock. Ended up with a big pocket of sediment here. The indicators were there. If you see on the left-hand side how some of that, you got some salmonberry and various things happening. So you can tell that that's really draining fast. Anyway, the cut slope just kept going back on him and back on him. So what we did, we just slowed the road heading down. Like he did the right thing. He stopped, called us in, and so what do we do? So we got a whole bunch of sloughing and raveling off. We knew bedrock was 10 meters ahead, so yeah, we're almost there, right? So let's just take our time and pull it through. Make sure we're in a rainfall shutdown, reduced rainfall shutdown time frame here, and so it took us an extra 2 days to get through this instead of plowing through. But it was just going to settle up and angle back. So we ended up with a high cut slope. It's going to ravel for a while, a little bit of maintenance. Keep that road in slope so the water's not draining over the edge. So it really worked. It's just a matter of how, talking to the team, how are we going to approach this? So the operator, myself, the professional that was responsible for this road, all sort of stood on site and decided what the best method was to resolve this. A little bit of wet site indicators there on the right. Devil's Club bottom, false hellebore in the middle there. Of course, favorite skunk cabbage on the top. So, yeah, wet sediment pockets, organic accumulations have already gone over. Very common in draw features. When we're coming off sort of a convex slope, and on the side of that convex slope, we got the concave, and you got buildup of soils. It's a really bad spot. And, to to help that out here, in this case, we had punching on top of smooth bedrock. So smooth bedrock and black ooze, not a good combination. So he went for a little ride. Key messages, know or try and learn indicators of slope instability. We do our best out there. Quite often, you know, it's either dry summer, nothing showing through. It could be a bad day, you know, my eyes are half closed, they're not open. You know, if your layout people or your operators get a feeling, your operators are more likely to get a feeling because they're working in that all the time. Your new layout guys need to get this kind of training to go out with trained people to actually learn what those indicators are of potential slope instability, right? What do you think, Rob? Is that right? Yeah. Mike?
I have a question for the group. How many people are here to do layout? How many of you get to see your road built when you're done? Right, so like what Del's talking about.
Yeah.
Getting out there with the trained people, one of the things that, you know, I try to do on my operation, it's not easy because again, it costs money, is building a plan where my layout person gets to go look at their road being built. I think when I moved here, I designed road for 3 years before I ever saw a road built. What a failure that is, right? Try to, if you're a planner or you're a budget person or you're a project manager, it's something else to think about. Make sure those people are getting a chance to learn from what they're looking at and see what they're doing. I think that's really important, as well as getting over Del during the assessments, do what you can there.
Yeah.
If you need to, change your process. But
And get the layout people and the CRPs out with the operators. Like they're our best learning experience right there if we can get on site with the operators for sure. Final design and road plan, is that you or is that me? Am I still going? Jesus, good, eh? So, this is what a lot of you guys do. I sort of tip in on it every now and again. So this is basically, you know, how we set up our roads. Alignment, vertical and horizontal alignments. Drainage is number one in my books. That's got to be attended to. In the interior, they actually have drainage assessments. They go that far. We don't do that here. Typically, you know, we just try and maintain natural drainage, and we don't find that drainage assessments are a big one up there. They have sort of what's called it's bench over steep ground. So they do. There is a lot of potential for long steep runouts. So we're less so here. So we don't do those drainage assessments yet, anyway. Plan maps are important. It's important that all prescriptions are on the plan map and profiles, cross sections representing prescriptions. And the map is the main document, and that's required all your environmental management systems and forest management systems on there. The map needs to match the geometric designs that are submitted. And you need consistency. This is really important between ground markings and plan documents. So what's on the ground should be what's on your map. Quite often I'll go out and I'll have stations, I'll have tie points or TPs on the ground. But then I get they send the designs off to me and I don't have those TPs on my cross sections, so I don't know where in the heck I'm at. Like, that's me looking at that. Now think of the poor operator out there who doesn't have that reference with his cross sections. So very important that what is on the ground is represented on the map, whether it be stations or tie points or IPs. That's number one. So construction techniques should be on that map. Usually when we go out there and we're looking at steep slopes, we have all kinds of prescriptions that we're sending our clients. The drainage structures you guys deal with, quite often we're looked to put input in on that, but it's usually done by the by the coordinating registered professional on that. All the sensitive terrain, worker safety should be on there. That should be definitely number one. And of course your coordinates, your legends. So it can be complicated. This is an example of a really complicated map. So as an operator, I'm handed this and I'm going like, okay, what comes first? You know, the chicken or the egg. So I definitely have to know where I am. You know, we do have the tools out there now. If we've got ground markings, great. If we've got good field markings, super. But if we've got that machine with our new technology in our cab now, and I'm a strong promoter of this. I've seen it for, I guess it's been 15 years when it was first introduced out east when I first saw it with Irving. And boy, these guys are just, they know where they are at all times. And I can strongly recommend that these guys get some of this technology in their cabs. I think it's a little bit for some people to start out, but...
Did you say what? Did you say a piece of software?
Yes.
Are you talking about Avenza? Yes.
It could be Avenza. That's one of the ones out there, yeah. Yeah. A lot of other people, Innovation has a piece of equipment out there that goes in and also does your production stats and all that kind of stuff. So it can become, you know, much larger if you want it that way. But yeah, real good safety tool. That you can even, there's even programs where you can shove, you know, little warning signs in there when you hit that full bench end haul, or when there's a potential rock fall zone or something like that. That's really where we should be heading. We should be using some of these technologies. And I strongly promote it, but again, as long as the operator knows where he is on the ground, that's the main focus here, right?
Hey Dale, just a footnote to that.
Yeah.
We had a slide off the end of that road, about 300-meter slide, and the back end of it ended up being held. I think you had this map before we started in here. So that road on the lower.
Which one are you talking about?
Well, the one on the. It's
It's on
the right-hand side, just past the switchback that hooks back.
Yeah.
100-meter switchback.
Yeah.
50 meters past that, we had a slide that went down and cut off the two lower roads as well. And the back end of that block,
Yeah.
the top corner ended up being alley.
So what are you saying? Did we do something?
Well, I'm just telling you, there was what we're talking about here is the slides. And,
Yeah.
the operator, they weren't in, the machine didn't go over the bank, but it was just thin organics
Over rock.
over sheer hard granite.
That's that granite in the back end of snowslide. Yeah. 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 Well, that's good to know. And you see, like I did, that's the first I've heard of that. But it would be nice to know that, just for my, I don't have to be on site, but just so I know that has happened and what recommendations were made. Was there any that were needed beyond, did we need to end haul any more spoil? We just had one up in Holberg where, again, one of these ridgetop ones, Mike, but this was, after an 80 millimeter rainfall kind of thing, and the guys were kind of waiting, but I don't know if they waited quite long enough, that sort of 2-day wait that they're asked to wait in under Western's intermediate rainfall shutdown zone. Anyway, it took off and went right from ridgetop down to valley bottom. Nice big one. So we're getting I'm getting feedback from most of my clients on that now, which helps me determine, like, maybe, we're 45% slopes up there, but should we be doing something else? Is there something else I could have done? Just because I'm maybe in that ridgetop position over potentially unstable slopes down below, which were 40 or 50 meters down below. Maybe I should have been end hauling the whole thing. Don't know. But this is where these guys did the right thing. They stopped, they pulled out, they reported, they took all kinds of pictures and sent them down to me. And yes, we're still working on that one. And this is kind of timely, this talk, because there's been so much rain on snow event. It's been just amazing. The calls, it's crazy. So here's a bit simpler one, kind of nicer. You only got a few recommendations there. Just an example of another road plan going on there. Sometimes it can be simple, sometimes it can be quite detailed, but if it is quite detailed, that needs to be talked to with the operators, right? Or the supervisors. They need to know that, they need to convey it to the crew. So that means the coordinating registered professional, who's ever responsible for that road, needs to go there, like almost in the bush, and say, hey, this is a really dicey area. Let's be very careful here. This is what we need to do. In the interior, I was just out there for a while, and they're actually doing slope staking, and they're finding it quite successful, especially if you're in really difficult terrain. You're doing lots of steep cuts, maybe not competent bedrock, all fractured bedrock. So they're actually spending, what they're estimating is around an extra $2,000 for 100 meters of slope staking, which isn't too bad. So you get an engineering firm, they go stake it. The operators seem to love it. I was talking to one of the operators out in the Castle area there, and he says, best thing since sliced bread. I know where my machine's supposed to be all the time, and I know where that road grade I'm trying to achieve is. So they do spend a little bit extra money when they're in dicey terrain. We don't do it on the coast yet, to my knowledge.
What are they doing for slope staking? Just like clearly defining the spot where you're going, or what do you mean?
Yeah, you go from a P line, from your grade line to we're kind of not there yet. You're getting ahead of the game, but there's offsets in cross sections. So when the guy's dealing the cross sections, there's offsets. So that's accommodated for in the field instead of just leaving it on the diagram. So you go and whatever's you've done on your cross sections, you move to the field. So you do an L line. So you actually move that line into the slope generally. And you put where your center line is supposed to be and what your grade is supposed to be. Has anybody done that? You've done that?
Yeah, we did a lot in Washington State, especially on grade critical stuff. Like
Yeah.
Critical switchbacks.
And was that in bedrock or?
Anything where you're constrained, because it helps you keep that elevation from
It
water.
does. The machine knows where he's supposed to be.
He knows, yeah. You
But-
just set at the top of your slope, and here's a distance, and then the angle, and there's your ditch line. So.
Definitely critical if you got some difficult road construction. And generally that's for short sections. So yeah, it shouldn't be too costly, I don't think either.
We've got switchbacks where the builder is too low, and you end up with a big wall when you try
Yeah.
to turn.
Yeah.
So trying to keep.
So then he's pulling all his grade back down to the bottom of the switchback and yeah, building up. Yeah. Switchbacks are one of our biggest concerns really, for that, those tight switchbacks.
What happens with the water in the switchback and outside of it and inside of it?
I know, yeah. And getting that grade right, Yeah, it's tricky. So again, this is just a reiteration, accurately reflect ground conditions. Easy to read and understand. That's not always doable, but if you got to break that map up into several pieces. Highlight potential worker safety hazards is number one here. And it's got to be a useful tool. And the guys have to know that they can follow that and be reassured that what they see up there on the bank is where they are at on their map, be it a digital map or a piece of paper.
Do you get many prescriptions where they get you to come back during construction?
It's getting more and more, Rod. They're trying to make us more like engineers in that respect, where you have to do as-built for your bridges. So if we do have difficult construction now, we're playing it a bit safer. And yeah, we're asking the client that, yeah, somebody should be on site, not necessarily us, but some professional needs to be on site to guide this through and to report back and just make sure we're there. Has anybody ever done that in the field? Yeah.
Well,
it's happening more and more.
We've had the geotech come back
Yeah.
because he's suggesting it.
And is it working, or is it you just think it's a money grab?
That communication, right? It's the team communication. And
Yeah.
so in the really technical spots.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're there for a couple hours, or you may be back the next day or whatever. It's a little bit harder to do when you're remote, right? You know, if you're way back up the back end of the Klaskish or something, you know, how do you get there all the time? And there's no camp to stay in and all that kind of stuff. So it's a bit of a challenge. Mike?
Just to add one thing on the same theme of communication. If you think back a few slides, there was that plan map on there that was super clouded and complicated and pretty busy. I mean, I know we all go out there and you walk out your road heading and you ask the excavator operator, where are you on the plan, or can you show me your designs, and they pull out their brand new book that they've never looked in, and you know they don't know how to read them, right? So we're not here to tell you what these should look like, but what we do ask you to do is try to go home and think about in your own organization again, how you could make that something that those operators can use and see. There's no simple answer here. We've got a lot of obligations to discharge. There's a lot of info to give. You know, the backside of that plan is probably full of information as well, but just don't be shocked when they don't know what it is. Cross-sections and designs are very similar. I don't know how many times you go out there and you're talking to the operator who's been doing it for 25 years, and within a few seconds, you very quickly realize they have no idea how to read a cross-section. They don't know where they are on the grade or where they are, you know, horizontally or vertically. So at that point, you got a couple choices. You can go, oh my God, you don't know how to read a design, or you can maybe take a little bit of time in a real respectful way to help them understand that. And I think what you'll find, we do this in camp sometimes at night. You know, if you ask, hey, who wants to roll through the designs, I'll show you how to read a cross-section real simply. They're keen to know it. But you've got to respect, you've got to make it, you know, it's humbling for them. They're operators, they're professionals. It's not easy to say, I don't know how to do that. Right?
Well, even us, like, I'm not going to put my hand up and tell you I don't know how to read a design.
Right, so
but there's people in this room that don't know how to read a design.
And one of the other things this group is working on that you'll see in time, that's an issue that we've identified, is we're going to work on a very simple how to read a cross-section for operators, a little one-page piece. We'll get it out there for you to use, but it's certainly an issue. And again, it comes back to communication. What's your role? How can you help people learn it? How can you do it respectfully? And you'll see these guys, if you show one of them how to read a cross-section, the next time you go out there, his binder's really dirty because he's been using it, we're looking at it. And he's now showing other people, hey, that's what that little line on there means. We're actually supposed to be down 1.5 meters here, or in slope 1.5 meters. You know, it's not a desire not to know, they just don't know sometimes. And the same with professionals like Nelson. Sorry to interrupt, but important piece.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I just want to comment, if somebody can't maybe get their details of your map or your design, it's because that's the problem with the plant, really.
Yeah.
Like the graphic layout of your map, the legends on your design, on your road design, they need to spell out all these codes and abbreviations that are throughout road ends. Like, lots of designs don't have that because it comes through on templates and nobody really knows. Someone who isn't in it every day has no idea.
Yeah. And I'm finding a lot that maybe it's a training thing. People aren't being trained. The people who are supplying the designs are not really being trained on how to properly do that. So, and it's a matter of nobody's got time, you know, like we're all hair straight back and so there's no time. But
the other thing there is, I mean, you've got a legal obligation to make hazards known to workers. But I can guarantee you, if you put that map out there, and then it goes through the planner to the wood foreman, down and down and down, and then WorkSafe shows up, and they go ask the operator, do you know what the hazards are? If you can't read the map, just because you wrote it on there, you know, you probably failed, and you're probably in non-compliance. So that's for sure a trend that's been identified, is what we talk about as planners and front-end people. It has to be legible and known to the operator. We're missing that in the food chain. So again, the challenge is, how do you do that? Like, just because you get a template from your company on what your map should look like, are you doing the right thing? Is there a different way? Right? And we don't know the answer, but we know the problem.
So it turns out to be, the problem turns out to be that communication. So the guy that's actually handing the pre-works over to the operator really has to be strong in having feedback and having the understanding that the operator knows, or the supervisor knows exactly what's going down on that map or what's going down in that design. Yeah.
You know, 35 years ago when I worked for McMillan Waddell, we would give sociability training sessions to the road crews.
Yeah.
And so the idea that we don't have time, I think, is a very flawed concept. There's no reason that the road crews, and not just the excavator operators, are being trained to read these cross sections, that sort of thing. 35 years ago, we could do similar things.
Yeah.
And took the time to do it.
And today you can't.
Any excuse not to do it now?
Good point, Terry. And I think some people are better than others, and some licensees are better than others. What we're not seeing is it across the board. And how do you deal with that? Again, it's talking, like I know some small licensees that are excellent in training their crews. You know, they've taken what we've given out here for the road crew, summary, our summary, and they've gone over it with their crews and stuff like that. But, you know, as our group is also recognized, is people still don't understand what those cross sections are and what that profile means, kind of thing. So let's try and get something simple out there that actually make it simple for them. I mean, you must have done that with Mac Blow back in the day. Make it simple for them.
Yes and no.
Yeah?
I think if they, we didn't call it boomship, we call it till. We tried to speak in language that people understood.
Uh-huh.
But you didn't go in there treating them as dummies and try and make it too simple.
Yeah. No, there's a middle of the road there.
You shouldn't do that, ever.
There's a middle of the road, yeah. No. Works two ways. It's that whole feedback loop, communication. But that's sort of what's missing sometimes when everybody gets busy. That's sort of what's missing. Question back there? No?
Kind of gets worked out of the whole system too, because it's who can give the best rate, and it all comes back to money.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if you're dealing with contractors, and most times it is contractors now, Terry, it's not company crews, so a bit different kind of thing out there, not as good effective as, throwing things down. Anyway, something to think about. Anybody else? So the final design and road plan, these are just kind of the stuff that as terrain providers, we try and have these in our reports to actually spell out this is sort of what we mean, the dashed lines saying that was the original sloping ground, and this is what we expect it to look like at the final end there in the rust color. Same with three-quarter bench. Now this is generally used if we see some steeper slopes. And we'll use key and rock if we got lots of rock available. Quite often you might not have that rock available, but you'll still do a three-quarter partial end haul. Big objective here is to remove those fines and organics. Full bench diagrams for BC. Again, that means that your road is sitting on BC, right? Full, stable slope. Stable subgrade. Plan elements in road design, again, they can be a little bit complicated. This one has it, this road edge presentation says everything has the plan on the upper right, the cross section on the upper left, and then the profile down below. So critical elements in that road design: grades, culverts, ground types, stationing, end haul sections, design specifications, and of course the scale. Often the date is critical because these things change with prescriptions and recommendations from varying parties. But really important that that your cross sections match what is expected of that terrain, and that your profiles actually state there, right there, where your prescriptions are. Okay, so wherever that you've come up and concluded that you need, for example, a full bench end haul from station 250 to station 300, that should be on the profile. So the operator's got a reference right there.
Where you need the transition zone too.
Yeah, and we'll talk transitions here. I think Gino's going to cover transitions, but transitions aren't always easy, and some of my clients don't really want to do that transition. They like to have it, unless I'm really in a ground where I know you have to have a transition from here to here. Quite often they don't want to see that there. They're just worried more about appraisal dollars. And
I'm finding in doing the road designs, though, you can't catch the fill in those transitions.
In the
It's steep already.
yeah, so you need to start that transition before that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's and you don't deal with appraisal, but still, you know, you got to start before that if you're getting into that section and you got to push into that slope. Gino will discuss transitions more here down the road, unless anybody's got something they need to deal with right away. Again, here's an example of a good set of cross sections here. You can see right in here we got the full bench happening right through there. A little bit of a draw here back to full bench, and then you got, you know, standard. Oh, what other thing? It's not working. And a steep profile here. We're shooting up some really steep slopes, so that is another work-safe criteria, by the way. And it's also in our forest road engineering guidebooks as a guide. I think it's greater than 18% for 150 meters is critical that you do that you look at that before you start hauling on it and do a risk assessment on that road. So another one of those little, it's not a regulation, it's a guide, I believe. What's that? No, that's done by the road has to be built. The road is built, and it's done by usually the coordinating registered professional or somebody working for him or her.
Is it regulation yet to sign off on a built road?
It's guideline.
It seems like it's coming.
Yes.
With bridges.
Yes. So it's now, as built is now a regulation for bridges. It is definitely recommended in all our guidelines for roadworks for AG BC. And so, yeah, that's a part that we noticed when we were doing the steep roads, sort of auditing for British Columbia roads. We looked at the Kootenays and here, and yeah, that was definitely missing, that sign off. Although it's been out there for years to follow. So, you know, we are going to be judged by guidelines, but it is not regulation.
So the question of is it law or not is an interesting one. Sorry, Delphi.
No, butt in.
I mean, when we first started this group, we sat down at the Safety Council office in Nanaimo about 3 years ago. WorkSafe was very, very present in that room. And I think that if you ask them, and I'm reluctant to speak on their behalf, but what I've heard is that there probably is an interpretation of the law that says it should be signed off by a professional. And it's about the piece of legislation that talks about a certain depth of excavation or using machinery. So there may be a place, and I think what I've heard them say is, look, you guys need to get your act together or we're going to go there, right? And part of the reason why this group exists is to try to put some tools in play to help us do a better job there. So I think it is coming. I think it's only a matter of time. But is it law or not? I'm open for interpretation at this point. I think we're getting some purview, but for how much longer, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, my interpretation is that this is professional work, and if you aren't putting your seal on it, you're not really following our professional standards. Like, I know it's not industry standard, it's not every road design, but it's like a little, it's just like.
I'll touch on that.
Yeah. But again, that is that's CRP stuff, or coordinating registered professional, or the coordinating member. Gino's going to touch on the hierarchy of what goes where. Again, here's Rich. Here is where I was talking about the offset here. This is the kind of stuff you might want to look at slope staking.
Dale?
Yeah.
I just wanted to maybe point out that in areas where there's LiDAR, you can import that into AutoCAD and you can do a 3D design.
Yes.
Versus just the road end starting 2D. So sometimes that does help if you want to go back out later and do sculpture.
This helps. An interesting point. I had a story there that I told at the last session. I had a client phone up, and of course I'd been out, and it was steep slopes. It was ridgetop type stuff and steep bluff below me. So I was going along making my calls, one of those horrific, ugly days out there. And then so he came back to me and reported that he didn't really agree with my calls, and that LiDAR told him that it was, there was definitely a bench down there and stuff. And I'm going like, pretty steep to me. And I said, well, it's up to you. We could both go back into the bush and ground check. He says, well, I don't think we need ground checks if we got this LiDAR. And I'm going like, well, whatever. I says, I can't sign off on that kind of stuff. But LiDAR's good. If you get in steep terrain in a certain kind of bush, it can be off quite a bit. And we do have to remember that those ground checks are extremely important when you're dealing with LiDAR. LiDAR is a beautiful tool, though. It's made my job so much easier. I don't know, imagine everybody agrees in this room. It's made our jobs a lot easier. Yeah. We actually target. We know where we want to go. So, plan element instructions. Again, that's the instructions are usually on the back of the pre-works or someplace in the documentation for pre-works. Safety, the summary of the road instructions for each section, where the drainage structures are to be placed, instructions for end haul, special construction. Spoil sites, really important on spoils. Other resources, ribbon colors. Sometimes companies have their own ribbon colors, and they designate certain things. You want to make sure the operators have that knowledge to follow the right ribbons. Again, here's an example of this where you've got your road concerns, from your different stations. A hole in road, fill in something. This is a reactivation on the top there. Just a few recommendations. Everybody's seen them in this room, I imagine. Essential plan elements. Sufficient information to allow construction for the plan. You have to link to the standards, sufficient documentation, and rationale. We do definitely, as terrain people, we have to provide rationale for why we want that prescription in place. And signed and sealed by registered professional. Team concept is really important, getting the professionals, the specialists, and the CRPs, and getting that feedback, like Terry was saying, from those, and don't treat them like somebody less. Hey, Terry? They're us. And that's why this whole thing is not just for professionals, it's for everybody out there, everybody who's working in the bush on what we do. That's a key component of this. Going back here. So key messages for this section. Address safety, alignment, drainage, and terrain. This produces an effective and representative plan for the maps, profiles, and cross-sections. Include all the information that you might need, especially that the road crews need and the supervisors need, and make sure that that information is understood. Again, that toss-off, the feedback, knowing that, yeah, I can now walk away from the site and say, yeah, everybody knows what they're going to do here. And if they don't know what they're going to do, they should also know that they're to stop and get back to you, right? Stop and finish that loop off, that feedback loop. All right.
So we'll get started with road construction, which will bring in information that we just talked about with the planning and communication. We'll split this between myself and Del through the presentation, then I'll come back at the end and talk about maintenance, inspections, and deactivation and so on. So road construction. Starting with the selection of builders, road contractors out there, getting into the areas where we have sensitive terrain and so on, it's very important to have people that are qualified, trained, and experienced in the field. Knowing who you've got out there will also play part of how much supervision or how much information you need to give them, or how often professionals will want to get out in the field to see what's going on. So it's something to keep in mind. If you're working in the Central Coast, or if you're into the West Coast of the island, people with the experience in working in those geographical areas is really important, and the skill sets that they bring as well. We were talking a little bit a while ago around guidelines and whether signing off is law. If you're a member of the ABCFP or EGBC, there are practice guidelines out there. A lot of people are familiar with the crossing guidelines, but and this is more fluke than anything else, the Forest Practice Board did a review last year on steep slopes. The report did come out a few months ago. It's really nothing to do with what this group has been working on. It's more timing, and it's probably just by chance that we're doing this presentation and the reports come out really recently. But some of the highlights of that report really indicated that licensees and contractors are doing some work out there, and forest professionals are not involved during the construction phases. And it really stood out during the audit by the Forest Practices Board. So both associations and through the Joint Practice Board have the road guidelines out there. We know with the ABCFP, they brought in the bridge or the crossing guidelines within their bylaws per se. But the practices guidelines that are out there is something that people are going to be measured against and judged against. So it's something to keep in mind. The roads guidelines does require you to sign off as a professional at the end that you've either built, done maintenance work, or where the professionals are involved in all phases of roads. So that's something to keep in mind. The work safe requirements out there as well, there's a number of them, but definitely a couple to keep or to be aware of. Slopes over 30% needs to have a plan, and a plan done by a qualified registered professional. And they do come back and reference the guidelines as what WorkSafe will look at to, when questions come up or when they're investigating events. As well, another one that's out there is 6 meter high cuts. If you have anything that's over 6 and over in terms of height, you need to have those reviewed in the field after constructions for stability. So the guidelines talk about the coordinating member. That's the person that's pulling the package together and really putting the plans together, and probably the person that's releasing it to the supervisor that's going to be overseeing the construction. Part of that, this person may be doing all phases. If you're into a real simple road, this coordinating member might be doing all phases of the project. But quite often you have specialists, people like Dell and terrain specialists coming in, people, bridge engineers involved in the crossings, the road personnel, and other people that are involved in the project. So all that information is being pulled in. Could include your RP bios if you're doing fishery stuff and so on. So a good reminder for everyone, typically companies will do this on a regular or even an annual basis, but your job safety breakdowns, your standard operating procedures, most companies have EMS, whether it's Highland Timberlands, Western, Inta4, Timber West, BC Timber Sales, everybody, a lot of the bigger firms or companies out there are all certified, so they have their processes. It does include all workers and people even on site. You'll do some pre-works with the people, the road builders, the supervisors, and quite often it will include your actual excavator operators as well. So pre-works are really important, especially when we're getting into sensitive terrain. We're the terrain specialists is identifying areas that are questionable. We're getting into full bench. The pre-works are going to be very important. This is a handoff. This is where the professional really stands back and and gives the information and the information knowledge to the road crew and the supervisor. So you really want to be cognizant of how that is happening and how that information knowledge is being transferred. Because if an incident does happen, people will look at the designs and they'll have all the time in the world to read all the reports that are buried in that big binder you give the excavator operator. And if the operator hopefully is still alive, will be asked, and as well as the supervisor, the report said here on page 59 in nice little black font that you needed to do something special. Why didn't you? And if the answer is I didn't have a clue, the binder's that thick. So if there's some critical areas that people need to be made aware, that information, knowledge, and transfer through communication is really key. So you want to make sure that everyone gets on the same page. We get into areas of your cut and fills and end haul, and what does that mean? And the questions even being asked out there, we quite often, terrain specialists will put, this is conventional construction. Well, what is conventional construction? We've seen slides on 30% slopes in the Central Coast area. Essentially, you've got swamps on the hillside, which is quite amazing. You get into those organic soils, folly soils, and the different terminology for it, but on very smooth bedrock. You're in the middle of summer, and Mike showed a picture of one of those where the excavator operator will start digging, and it's going to be very wet. We've had no rain, you're nice, dry, 30-degree summer weather, and before you know it, you're into this swamp on the hillside, where if the operator's going to start tracking onto that, he's going to go down the hill. So we've seen, as recent as 2 years ago, an excavator go down on 30% slope and slide down the hill. So just be aware, I know we're talking a lot about steep slopes, but they do happen on shallow slopes. So supervision is key, and good supervision is critical, especially when you're getting into these areas that are going to be challenging. And supervision here is the communication with the operators and making sure that operators are aware of some of the key indicators. The presentation that the council's put together for operators is really good. It's an hour. It doesn't take a lot of time for operators to watch it on video. And to be aware of these indicators and some of the things that could be challenging and know when to stop to really ask the questions to the supervisor that's around. So following the plan, and this is nothing new to most people, this really came out hard when Force Practice Code was out in mid-90s. It's to stop work when you encounter something different than what you're expecting, and stop work when you're not sure and ask the questions. That's the key. It doesn't take all that long to get the right people on site. Sometimes, though, if you're into isolated camp work and you're looking at getting somebody in, there may be a couple days there that before you can get a terrain specialist out. But that's where, if you have some other work that you can do, such as ballasting roads and doing some ditch work or dealing with spoil sites and so on, you might have some back work that you can do, but getting the right people out is the key. Rainfall shutdowns. This is, we've talked about it a little earlier. There's all kinds of guidelines out there right now. Every company will have a set, and it'll go anywhere from just measuring your 24-hour rainfall to measuring your 12 hours, 48, 72, water balance, rain on snow, wind, sunny days, temperatures. There's all kinds of things that really get mixed into it. And the more complicated those rainfall shutdown guidelines are, the harder it is for whoever it's going to be in the field making those decisions to really follow the guidelines. So here I would challenge the people in this room as a coordinating professional that's handing off this package. If you're handing out a package and you've got a rainfall, and you should have a rainfall shutdown criteria with it, make sure you know how it works and tell the supervisor how it should be measured as well. So are you measuring it before you're heading out to the field? You have automated stations. Are you looking at rain gauges in the field? We all know we have storm cells that come through, so you might be good in one valley, the other valley over you might not be good. So it's really important to watch those. I would imagine probably everybody that's a trained specialist doing field work here are probably going to be in the field this week and next, given the rain on snow event we had Wednesday and the storm that came through on Sunday. I know my staff are. We've got lots of slides out there. So the key here is, when do you shut down to make sure that people are safe and make sure people are not going out when they shouldn't be neither.
Gino, I talked to one of my clients on this just yesterday, and so he had gone out and invested in all the latest technology, about 10 grand in a nice rain gauge for his fire safety and everything, and I guess he was close to one of our almond communities working, and it all got shot up. Yeah. So he lost his investment, so he wasn't too happy. But these are the things that you really need to have, and I don't know, I guess if you're close to a community, you do have that risk, on your investment. But if you have that technology, I think it's the latest step for your workers out there to make it easy for them to know exactly when to shut down. Not trying to figure it out.
And the automated stations are good to make a call from the office, and depending where your stations are and kind of what's going on generally, you got to be aware. You should also have a rain gauge on site when you get there, where you're actually physically doing the work, because literally a valley over from one another will give you different rainfall. If you're dumping that gauge in the morning or you're dumping it at night, I'm a big believer that gauge should be dumped at night. And the reason I say that is you can see when you get there in the morning how much rain has fallen overnight and what you're getting into during that day. A number of storm events, for some reason, do happen over the night periods. And when the crews show up on site, if they see they've got 50, 70 millimeters of rain, they don't really know if it's happened overnight or through the day before. So they dump the gauge and they start all over fresh. But if that storm started at 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're working to 100 millimeters, by noon they could be well over 100 millimeters of rain. So, and they're still working out there. So dumping at the end of the day and not dumping in the morning, I think, is something that people really need to look into and be able to make some pretty good decisions as to whether they should be out there or when they should shut down during the day. Yeah.
Sorry. The other thing we're talking about the rainfall again is the collection of and calculating the rainfall. And I've gone in after and looked at the data and did the math and went, you guys should have been shut down the day before, or you should still be shut down.
Yeah.
And I know some of my clients now, they have a spreadsheet that they give, like a computer spreadsheet they give to their operators. And all they can do, they just put the numbers in. There's no math involved.
Yeah.
And it just turns red and it says stop.
Yeah, and that's good.
So,
yeah.
So it'd be nice to recall that.
Yeah, so technology is out there now. Like, I'm a big advocate of iPads, and you can put a lot of things on there, and lots of tools to facilitate the work that goes on.
One of the things we talk to operators about, and I guess it applies for this room, and I will apologize in advance if I offend anybody, but I really don't care. If you're out there on the setting and you think it's rained a lot, the foreman rolls by and said, "Yeah, I dumped the gauge. It's good. Just go to work." Is that okay? Right? It's about that culture again. We're encouraging them to ask those questions. Make sure. I'm not saying bad things are happening out there, but production pressure affects everybody. And until everybody starts asking those questions, it'll continue to be a problem. So, if somebody tells you they dumped the gauge and it looked good, you might want to ask a few more questions about that.
Yeah. So getting into phase interaction, and you've also heard the term out there of phase congestion. One of our slides that we had a few years ago, the road crew were working and the excavator did go down the hill, but there were also fallers working down below. And the slide and the slide track and the debris, the trees and everything that came through the setting, the fallers were within 20 or so odd meters of that landslide. So it's not only about the crews working there, but you can have yarding crews, you can have all kinds of people. We're just in time kind of putting plans out, road building, and you got falling, yarding, and all kinds of activities going on. That's something to be aware of. With fallers, we need to be looking at those right-of-ways. How much right-of-way should you be falling in some tricky terrain, and things you want to keep in mind as you're going through those areas. Once the road is built, you want to make sure that your drainage is working well, your cut slopes have been dealt with. The grades and the widths are all as you've designed. Anything that changes should be reflected on the plan. And this is where the sign-off at the end comes into play, is that's all accounted for in the sign-off and parts of doing the review. A number of companies do have checklists for, as-built, or when they're actually doing measure-ups for payment and so on. They collect a lot of that data, so it's out there. It's just a matter of following through and making sure things were done according to the plan, or if the plan changed, that it's the coordinating member or a professional was involved. So a couple examples, very steep side hill, couple hemlock, high elevation, stacked a whole bunch of logs behind. It's about 6 meters in height. So just something you really want to be aware of, or if you're catching this, one, it shouldn't be happening, but two, if it's there, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to address that before you start getting fallers out there and people down below the slope? Same with burying wood and all kinds of debris, blasting over some logs that were stacked into the fill, some of the challenges there. If anybody's wondering, yes, it is a small PVC pipe. It's not for logging. It was a clean energy project, and there's a penstock in the fill here, so that's for drainage of the penstock. But anyways, things to watch for and to be aware of, and some of the challenges out there. So road crews need to know where they are, and I know we talked about the binder and the excavator operator. It's always good if you walk up to the site and you don't necessarily have the maps with you and you ask to see the operator's maps. And that way you can see if the map is nice and muddy and dirty, and then they're looking at it. If it's nice and clean, still nicely folded, they're not looking at it. So at that point you can start asking questions around, what's coming up, what are the challenges, and you'll quickly see if the operator is in tune with the plan that is out there. Then you can make adjustments accordingly. And you're probably not going to really come down hard on the operator, but you're probably going to come down a lot harder on the supervisor, making sure that that person does their job. And you want to be aware of the changing conditions out there. We kind of highlighted some of the key ones, but the weather, the terrain, and the drainage, and the time you're doing your work in. Transition zones. Interforce had real great success with this. They had a number of slides a decade or more ago. And they kind of started looking at their root causes, and a lot of them were occurring in the transition zone. So this is whether you're into conventional construction and getting into an end haul, there's a transition zone that happens as you're going into that end haul. You're not doing cut and fill and all of a sudden bang, you're into full bench. You can just imagine you'd have a road that's out and all of a sudden you're 6 meters in, kind of thing. So there's a transition period into that end haul, and as you're getting in outside of it, that full bench, you're also having a transition zone. And there could be a variety of reasons. We've talked about the bedrock. You got lots of water being drained. It can be into basal till as well. You want to watch where that water and where the sensitive soils are. So here's a photo, the example of the bedrock, and all of a sudden you're getting into some till or organics. And the operator's looking at his map and he's saying, hey, you know what, I've got a moderate bench here. I'm getting some good going. And he's really going to try to push ahead. He might be looking at this rock and saying, you know what, this has to be drilled and blasted, but the driller's busy, or I don't want to shut down now while he's drilling. I'm going to sneak around. And when you hear about people sneaking around, that's where you start getting challenges and some real problems. Quite often, they'll sneak around, but they'll punch their way up onto the organics, put some cross-punching through. The excavator is no longer sitting on solid ground. Half the excavator is sitting on your puncheon and whatever this material is. And if it's wet, we've seen the excavators go down the hill. So something to keep in mind is that excavator, both tracks, should be on good bench solid ground and not sitting on puncheon. Now there's places for puncheon and we do it lots and it's really good. But when you're looking at sneaking around in your transition zone, there's a good chance that the operator in that machine is probably going down for a ride. So for those putting maps together, this could be a variety either from the terrain specialists in the room or the coordinating members or force professionals. You know, you look at this, and this is what the operator has, right? The 3/4 B, EH, KIR. You know, we probably know what it means. It's actually a 3/4 bench, end haul, and key and rock. But does the operator know? So you got to ask yourself that. We're passing this message on. This is your plan. This is your road construction project that you're putting together. And, you know, what is that? The operator needs to know. So definitions and pictures to educate the people. If it's a real critical area, this is probably something that you want to highlight as, you know, there needs to be a field review done here. And you can highlight, you know, as a professional putting that plan together, you can say, you know, give us a phone call when you're within 50 meters of this area, and we'll make sure that we get somebody out in the field to look at it. It could be the supervisor that's overseeing it. Maybe it's the forest professional that put the plan together, or maybe it's your terrain specialist that needs to go out. But whoever's putting that plan together should be highlighting the key areas that need to be looked at. Same with the full bench end haul. You know, those terms need to be defined and put out there so the operator can find it. It shouldn't be buried in a big, deep report at the end of the day. More on the transition zones. There's slides that are naturally occurring out there, so people just need to be aware of that. And you might find yourself that you're working through an area that has some active landslides, and how the terrain specialist is accounting for that in the report. You got to make sure that they're actually out there and looking at it in your road building. And as you're coming in or out, if you're going through the toe of the slide or the head scarp or above, you want to make sure that people are aware as they're putting their plans together that these things exist. And it's not only the fill slopes that let go, but also the cut slopes. So sometimes the failure will occur on top of the machine, and we saw Mark earlier talking in the video about how the rock face moved at him, but it's not only rock, and you can have till doing this as well, and slope moving down and against the machine. And sometimes the machines get pushed over. This is an older picture of an event, and the machine was actually standing on the outside and, you know, sneaking around. So an example of that would be your full bench, and you're starting to get into the soils, the very deep soils, very wet, and we'll see in the next slide, it's very smooth as well. So the operator was coming out of a full bench, getting into another, whether it's 3/4 bench or half bench. But if you're sneaking around and you're on the outside, sometimes the machine does go down and finds themselves down the hill. And especially, you know, when getting into these smooth rock areas and it's wet, you really got to watch yourself. That's where people will get caught. So the operator recognizing this, if it's not picked up during the design, the terrain stability assessment, this is where, you know, the operator is actually sitting in the cab watching what he's digging. So he's the person that's going to have to make that call, and making sure they're educated what to look for and some of the indicators is very key. The more experience they get, they'll know this, and they'll know to get a hold of their supervisor. This is just another, some of the indicators. You got the sweeping logs up higher up, so you're getting into that area. The indicators are on the ground, so you got to be looking at all of this, and especially when you're doing the plan and putting any information together for the operator while they're working out there. So it's another, the machine didn't go too far on this one. He was able to grab the bucket into the ditch, but snow on the ground, so all of a sudden we're building road. It's probably on a nice slushy day. You can all imagine what that looks like out there. Very wet, and then the questions are, was that machine sitting on a solid ground, or was he standing on partially filled slope? And how wet is it? The rainfall shutdown guidelines. All those questions come bear. So just something to also be aware of and keep an eye on.
As I say, in all cases, it's probably not critical, but I think if you're in wet areas, on wet slopes, it's critical to identify those transition zones for sure.
Well, I actually get the construction contractor coming back and say, you show this end hole, but I know we're going to have to to take more out of
We're gonna, yeah, and that's crucial, and quite often, like on Crown Land, we're dealing with appraisal too, so you need to have that 20-meter criteria, and so, okay, do we have 20 meters, or do we have, maybe, it might be as much as 50, it might be 10 on both ends, who knows, so it's something that we as terrain people need to be looking at and considering for our clients, so, yeah, always. Yeah.
Something I'm becoming more aware of is just that during your layout, you kind of have to transition into and out of end haul if you want to even grade for your road.
Yeah.
So because your vertical offset increases, your grade line may go across the hill.
So you're seeing that in your design, right? Yeah.
The slope kicks up.
Yeah.
Your center line has to climb above your grade and then drop back in, and being able to identify potential end haul during the layout and make those adjustments to your center lines.
Yeah, and
these really awkward designs where you have huge cuts that you have to then design huge horizontal offset on. It has all sorts of weaknesses in terms of implementation, right?
You forestry people that are really good with the engineer package that you guys use. Road ends generally, I guess, probably 100%. Anybody else use any other program? No. But that, you guys, I find that somebody that's been there for a long time and manipulating that data all the time, it gets really good. And actually, he can work well with the trained people and provide input and say, you know what, you recommended full bench here for 20 meters, but there's going to be more, and we can do it right here and now. So we will expand that into maybe 3/4 bench, key in rock if we've got rock or not. So we just have to follow those plans out through. So then you're providing input to that terrain person as well before the final report. So yeah, it works two ways. Again, it's that communication that really is a bonus if we can do that. Good point. Yeah, so adverse grades, we all know when, constructing adverse grades is always a bit of a challenge. You've always got water coming down at the road heading, at your hoe or whatever. So got to make sure that, okay, you may even have to put more cross stitches in than what's called for initially, but make sure that that water doesn't get in behind the machine is the main thing. Pre-work should sort of identify, where these culverts go, but definitely make sure that that water comes off the road. I've seen a couple of adverse failures now. One guy actually did go over the slope about 10 meters, but he grabbed his bucket and he got back up. But no, it's pretty scary stuff when you've got water running right back into your road heading and it's coming down from behind you. So don't cut corners when you're working on adverse. Again, it's adding water to the heading. This is just an example of that road going up adverse and bang. Or down adverse, sorry. Bang. Spoil placement is also a big one. We try and make sure that all our spoil sites are away from natural drainages or imperfectly drained ground or certainly swampy ground and stuff, because when these things tend to fill up with lots of rain or rain on snow or whatever, they will overflow. So we don't want that spoil adding to that. Outside of RMAs go without question, everybody knows that. Slopes less than 30% is generally what we look for spoil sites. Sometimes it's really tough to find spoil sites, and we're usually putting them down below the roads or in spots on the road, but sometimes you might want to think outside the box and go up on an upper bench or something if you have to, if you're really looking at a steep road section with lots of end haul. So there is options out there. Try and keep those heights on your spoils and try and keep them right back from that lip over steep, right? Just things to think of when you're doing your layout. Well, here's an old picture. It's somebody's writing there too. That's probably mine from the other day. Little tick marks. So excavations, Here you see an excavation greater than 6 meters high. Right here is a piece of rock here that wants to come down. If this thing goes up all the way, there may be a problem. So sometimes, this might be a situation where you stop, you call the coordinating registered professional, or you call the terrain guy, call your supervisor if you're on the drill, and you say, hey, what am I going to do here? So you come up with a solution. And quite often that's maybe ramping up and getting that stuff down and building up your grade a bit so you can get up through there. But the big thing is greater than 6 meter high cuts. Work safe demands, we play that safe. Again, road constructions, overloading outside edges of the road. Here you find some stuff that on the left-hand side that basically log supported over your stumps there. So it's log supported fill, not a good idea. It's not going to last. If there's anybody going in there to do harvesting after you, they're definitely at risk. And if you're hauling down this road, again, you've got a log supported fill. How long is that going to last? Here's one that gave way on the right hand side. So you're stuck with basically a lip now. Again, some more examples of some perch debris piles and stuff. And these, sometimes it just requires monitoring out there to get these, to pick up on these things and just realize, hey, there's other people using this, and there's definitely resources at risk here, be it human or be it riparian or some other resource. Yeah, it's definitely something, we're not monitoring our roads a lot like we should be. We're finding a definite deficiency on that. I think the Forest Practice Board steep roads investigation came up with that conclusion. So yeah, monitoring is number one, especially after, we've had all this rain on snow stuff here over the last weekend kind of thing. Get out there and monitor. There's going to be problems, eh? We know that.
Just go back to your last picture.
Uh-huh.
The overblast on the right side.
Oh, this overblast here? Yeah, again, that's something, you can monitor that, but it's like Mike was talking about, if you've got high rock cuts, hard rock, you're going to end up with this, but you try and minimize that. And again, the drillers can, they can work away at that. There's things that drillers can do, and I'll briefly touch on that here. So things to consider, horizontal, vertical alignment we've talked about before. Inadequate right-of-way falling. So, if you've got steep roads and stuff, you've got to have that right-of-way felled properly. You got to make sure the trees are definitely off on the up-hand side of the road. Smooth bedrock is always a consideration. Working in poor light conditions this time of year is particularly deadly. Sometimes you just can't see where you're at. Machines can't see, where that road marker is. So, does he know when to start that special construction? Right-of-way logs, decking. That's always a big one. And again, the construction knowledge that we're talking about needs to be carried through to reconstruction of old roads and to deactivation as well. We're noticing a lot of our old roads that we're going into now. We're going into second growth timber, so we're seeing a lot of those either gray cat roads or cat roads, and a lot of fills are now becoming unstable. And drainage is critical. We've seen that. We've seen quite a few slides happen. We've seen work safe incidents happen because of old roads. So, yeah, definitely not a good thing. Drilling blasting operations should be focused towards controlling the blast. As we were talking about before, drill holes should be directional. You got to stem with adequate material. It's all these stuff you want to talk to your drillers about. Is the spacing proper? Get the, if it's a really tough piece of ground and the rock's unusual, get the explosives experts involved here. If it's a new driller blaster, make sure he's got the proper training, be it on-site training or be it, hey, you can actually get training from the International Society of Explosive Engineers. They put on sort of webinar type stuff. So there's stuff out there. Definitely the type of explosive you use, the drill spacings, the stemming. It's all very important in how we control our blast in steep terrain. Any input? Yeah.
A lot of us, trained scientists are not experts at all in rock slope stability.
For sure.
Do you see a lot of use of rock slope stability specialists, like geological engineers who really have a specialty in rock slope stability, being involved in these sort of situations?
Yeah, Terry, that's a good question. Quite often, we recommend them, actually. If it's beyond my scope, especially for scaling and stuff like that, you realize you've got a potential rockfall hazard above you when you're putting this road through. What do we need to do here? So you call somebody like Pacific Blasting or there's Rockstar out of Alberni is also a good company. He's got some scalers. He's got some stuff happening there. I don't know. Anybody else know some technical people around that can really help you out? But yeah, it's sort of beyond most terrain people's capability to say, hey, this is going to be stable. So
when I worked for Golder, I had,
you had the key people there.
Qualified rock slope stability engineers that I could call on that worked for Golder Associates.
Yeah. Are they still there? Are they still there? Like some of those guys are gone.
But it was a comfortable feeling for me to be able to just turn to a colleague and say, "Can you come and do this?" And to say to the company, "This is who we need."
Yeah. It's so important.
Does that happen, sort of with individual consultants as much? I mean, it was easy for me.
Yeah, it's easier for you because it's in-house. It's harder for us probably, but we do call in specialists, other specialists, if we think it's out of our bailiwick. They're usually more of the engineering style, like you need a GRS wall or something here to get through this crossing, so you need to contact one of the engineering firms on the island rather than the geos, who are more, we're basically structured to anything 2 meters, under 2 meters, and that's it. If you want to get technical and get, do your math with this crossing or with this rock slope, then yeah, you need somebody that's more than what you are. It's good to have that.
On the island that will do that kind of work, especially if you're getting into your rock cuts of 6 meters and higher. There's some geological engineers out there that are very specialized into their rock, and some of the big companies have a few. But one fellow that's on his own, I know I've used in the past with Michael Cullen, has done some of that kind of work, and it comes down to risk analysis as well. So you can start looking at traffic and volume and how often and what's the risk of rock falling on individuals. So there's people qualified in that field to look at your faces and your slopes to tell you if you're going to be okay, even during construction or before construction. It's nice to look at it after because you can start seeing your dips and slopes and everything else in the rock.
Yeah, and that's called global stability now. You guys are needing global stability, right? Yeah. So it's push up an extra notch, Terry. There's all kinds of fail-safes out there. But as terrain specialists, we got to use those people. We can't just say, hey, no, try this. It's beyond that anymore. It's like, let's get some real serious stuff in here. Or slope staking if we think that's going to work. But rock is a different story. Okay, anybody else? So it's really a professional's role to identify beforehand that you've got a stability problem, get the proper people in, and monitor these guys. Like, look at the slopes these guys are working below, and you're on kind of a dip slope, one of those mid-coast granite, big jointed sets and stuff, and these go all the way up the mountainside, and he's coming actually through a slide track, so this thing has slid off during a major storm event. So yeah, this thing is probably 100 meters wide. Drainage is number one in my books. If you've got your drainage down, you've got it licked, generally. Road surface runoff is a big one, causing all kinds of erosion. I know now with all our snow melt going on here just over the past few days, we've had lots of, road surface runoff going down for several hundred meters before it hits, a crossing, and then plugging up the cross ditch or plugging up the culvert, and away we go. We got problems. On the right here, there's so if the water's going to come down this ditch line, it's going to pop over that cross ditch a bit too high, right? Back across the road. So keep your ditch blocks low. Drainage control, again, same thing with, look at the extensive water running off the road surface here. We've got really erosive sandy sediments here. This is in the Okanagan. There's some definite problems here. Definitely got to keep a maintenance program going here. Those culverts or those sumps are going to fill up real fast. And here's more drainage control. So in this case, we got steep bedrock on the one side. Obviously, it was probably an older road and maybe new. I've been approached to say, why can't we put woody debris in the fill? But there's a good example on the left-hand side. Why not? Really, it doesn't work. You need rock. You need to have that drainage controlled, and certainly woody debris is not suitable for long-term drainage on steep slopes. Fill slope erosion on the right-hand side there. And again, here's some good examples. You got some excellent bit of armoring on the outside edge of a culvert here. Again, really erosive soils. This is up in the Kootenays. Cut banks, same, this solid sand, gravel kind of thing that holds up well at 70%, but anything above that, it's down, right? So use that rock if it's close by to blanket those upper slopes as well. Really effective. And this guy's also got some in the ditch line there to prevent excessive erosion. Here's one here where it's coming, basically had some rock fall onto the road and diverted drainage out and over. And once it gets over that edge of the road there, who knows what's going to happen. So you try to be very creative, make sure your drainage structures are there. Monitoring is number one. I like insloping my roads when I know I've got steep slopes below them. Put that water to the ditch line, down to the next culvert. Don't let that water, on a big rain event, go over that outside edge. And certainly helps to mitigate a few events happening, bigger ones happening. Road constructions change circumstances. So who's qualified or allowed to change the plan? So what, quite often, I can't, like I say, I can't identify everything. I try my best, but if that's not on the map, if I haven't put it on as a prescription or the CRP hasn't identified, the layout crews haven't identified it as something of concern, somebody's got to stop work and make that decision to change the plan if, in fact, that road's not going to work. Or there's something we've got to do. Like Mike said with his, what road was that? That was Holberg Road that you moved in. Classified Holberg. Holberg's never classified.
But the point there too is to make the right people qualified to change the plan. Don't just change the plan because you think you should.
Yeah.
Don't ignore an end-all section because if it's there, you need to go through the right process and make sure the right qualified person is making the change.
Yeah. No, and there's got to be, several people should be involved in making that change of plans, if in fact those conditions are different than those anticipated, right? All changes are to be discussed with the road construction team. So number one, make sure all the road crews on side and they're discussing it there. The supervisor comes to the coordinating registered professional, and if necessary, a trained person is involved. If not a big deal. It can be make it on site if everybody's pretty sure that this is going to work. right? But it's all about team. It's all about team playing here. So everybody involved with road planning, engineering, construction plays a really critical role in safe operations. And again, it's interaction of the team, getting that feedback from the road crew, making sure that the road crew knows if something's different, stop and talk about it, even if it's with the driller behind them. Stop and talk. What do you think? Key messages. No experience, training, and safety performance of the construction company, as Gino talked about. So, yeah, if you're in tough terrain, know that you've got the right operators on there that can handle it. Okay. Understand the pre-works. But number one, when the CRP puts out the pre-works, or his right-hand man or woman puts out the pre-works, that is understood by the operator, by the supervisor. If it's not understood, you got to really come back and start all over again. If it's too complicated and he'll tell you that or she'll tell you that, then start all over again. During road construction, stop if questions arise and report again. Proceed with caution through the transition zones and adverse grades and high cut slopes, bedrock cuts, steep grades, organic soils. Drainage control is of utmost importance, of course, and roadside debris, which has come out here in the last 5 years as being, we always knew it was significant, but nobody really wanted to move on it. But you got those, the steep debris piles on steep slopes, and I've seen them actually burnt up and actually cause a little slide down to the next 20, 30 meters long slope. So it can be pretty deadly. Change circumstances and changing the plan is a big one in road construction. Get back to whoever you need to there.
Reactivation, maintenance, and deactivation. So slides or machines going over the banks is not only associated with new construction, but we're also seeing it in these other phases. So we're going to touch a little bit on some of these things. They do happen in all of those different phases, and you can imagine if you're getting into definitely some heavy pullback, some old deactivation activities, you're getting potentially into fill slopes that have a lot of woody debris material in it that were built into a variety of periods of time. And same with the needs for plans, so we'll touch a little bit here on that. Reactivation is, we're starting to see, we're getting into more of this second growth and more into reactivating some old roads. So the professionals putting the plans together really need to think about, do you need to put a reactivation plan together for that road? Is there some potential hazards on that old road? So, and I'm not going to be able to give you a time frame. You're going to have to look at what's going on. When was that road used last? What condition is it in? If you have wood culverts, what species were put in there. If you're looking at some older roads, likely they probably use cedar. Now a lot of people are starting to put fir. If you're really in there short term, some people are throwing in some handballs. So you really got to be aware of that and the lifespan of those structures. So you need to have a look at it, to say the least, and then determine whether you need to put a plan together. Some of the roads might be fully deactivated and you're coming in and it's almost like new construction, but there could be some hidden hazards there. The deactivation might not have pulled all the material off the ends, so you might have some stumps still sporting some woody debris and some fills. And are you going to go through here and actually do a conventional construction, or are you going to do something a little more just because you might have some hazards down below? So you want to have a look at that and just make sure you know what you're getting into. An example of an old wood culvert, not anything that was big, single sill, both sides, probably what you would call like a half meter by 2 or 3 meters in span. An older road again, it's probably 20 to 30 years old. Got brushed open. The culvert was not planned for replacement or anything to that effect. These old culverts, they do have a variety of stringers, different diameters. They're probably not lashed, and those small culverts usually were not lashed. The operator in this case was a truck coming out with a load of wood. The truck went over top, was fine. Maybe broke the stringer as he was going over. The trailer following nicely in the tracks and really sunk down. You can see the trailer wheels, the tracks kind of going off to the edge. Fortunately for this incident, it was a preload truck, so the fifth wheel hook that trailer attaches to the truck actually snapped and broke, and the trailer went down the slope into the gully. The truck stayed on the road. The operator was fine. But it's something to keep in mind. You might have these, shallow culverts out there that you're not really going to turn your mind to or do a lot of thinking about. But think about the age, the species, and what you got, and what's the hazard or the consequence if anything was to fall down. Not long ago, we had a rock truck in a very similar instance, but the rock truck being much lower, being loaded, high center of gravity, go through, and the Moxie just flipped up on its side in the middle of the road. It was the weirdest thing to look at, but when you start analyzing what happened, it's just punching through an old wood culvert. Water management, as you're doing, whether it's reactivation or you're looking at deactivation, depending on the road conditions and the time of year and everything else that you're in, if you have water going over the road in a certain place, you want to make sure it's going to where water should be and keeping it to its natural drainage patterns. You might be putting it over a sidewall of a gully. It doesn't take much. I've seen it, you literally that cross stitch is 3 meters on the wrong side of where the center of that draw is, and you're putting the water just on the edge of the gully, and before you know it, the landslide occurs. So something to be aware of. And if you're doing your prescriptions out there, are you marking the inlet and the outlet of where those features should be? Different people have different practices, but just something to keep in mind. And highlight that to the supervisor that you're handing off the plan and to the operators to make sure that they know what they should be expecting out there. On the reactivation, looking at your old culverts, the cut and fills, it's really a pain in the ass sometimes to go down below that old fill and start walking around. You're into the woody debris of the old logging, and you got to crawl around. But if there's any indicators that you think there's issues with from a stability perspective, you probably want to have a look at those areas and see what's going on. The old drainage features, if you're looking at some real old roads, probably the slides have occurred already if you're lucky. But in the old days, we used to bring water and just train water down the road for kilometers and not necessarily follow the old drainage patterns. So something to keep your minds on. And communicate the plan to the operators as to what's expected. So again here, whether you're just putting a map together with where to replace culverts, or do you need to do some pullback and some more intense work, and how's your plan going to reflect that and educate the operator that's out there doing the works. So things to keep in mind. Any questions on the reactivation? Reactivation plans can look very much like new construction. So just again, at the end, there's a sign-off that should be happening. This, if you were to go through the roads guidelines by the association, that's all indicated in there.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Have you found when you're reactivating a road, you find drainage diversions? So you want to get that road back to the old water course, but that water course hasn't been used for 40, 50 years. Do you still find that better to put it back to the old course? Or?
Sometimes it is. You really got to look at what's going on and where your stability issues are. If the water's been going now in the new location for the last 40 years, it may be fine. You may not have any issues. But if that location is within a cut block now and you're within that rain on snow event and you're just going to start introducing a lot more water and flashy water, you might not want it to be there. So you got to think about where you're at and what's going to happen there into the future, right?
You got to line up the roads downslope too. You got to line up the culverts.
Yeah. You pretty much have to think yourself as that little granule of water that's going to flow down, and where you're going to go and where's it going to end up at the end of the day.
That's right. You have the discussions where you run into the point, well, what about the road down below now? I have to redo that one. Next.
And sometimes you'll end up doing the hydrology because you're mid-slope up there and say, hey, I need a 1200 pipe, and then you'll look where that water's going and there's a 600 down at the bottom. It's like, okay, well, well, maybe we need to address the bottom one as well. You know, there's decisions to be made on that.
Here, sometimes your fish habitat, right? Like a little bit off topic, but we've had the same question. You know, down slope over time, you created fish habitat, so it was another layer you had to deal with. Like you couldn't just move water, and you were dewatering fish habitats. So
Yeah.
it's another complication into the mix of what to do with it. And the instability was the issue today. So.
And maintenance and deactivation, again, here, you know, the professional putting the plan together or asking or putting the requirement that this road needs maintenance or this road needs to be deactivated really needs to turn their mind as to what level of plan and information is needed for the operator to do the work and do it safely. So whether you're actually just going in and replacing an old culvert or deactivating and pulling it out, is there a need for a professional plan to do that? So just something that you got to wrap your minds around as to the level of information that operator needs and make a decision on that. We had an excavator just doing some road maintenance, a little bit of pullback, doing water management on the road, and he was on the outside edge, and that outside edge failed. Rightly or wrongly, I'd say it's probably wrongly, but the operator was not wearing a seatbelt. And the story on this one, as the machine was actually tumbling and rolling, the guy was walking in the cab as he was going down until it landed and hit a tree. And the machine stopped, and then he crawled out. So he was very fortunate. Usually, if people don't wear their seatbelts, they're not so lucky. But something to be aware of, again, if you're with a machine, how you're lining up your tracks and having that conversation with the operator just to make sure. So, and these old roads, there's hidden features that people just don't pick up. So, and really, you got to be careful as to where you're sitting and what you're doing. Sometimes things get missed. A spoil site during some major works. The person that put the prescription together saw the ground, saw, hey, here's a nice beautiful bench, not going to worry about it, beautiful place to end haul the material, spoil it, everything looks great and dandy. Big storm event comes by and all of a sudden you lose 50 to 60 meters of road in that location and the whole spoil site is gone. Upon further investigation, it was noticed that the old road construction actually filled in the gully and it wasn't picked up on. The bench that we were looking at and thought it was a bench was actually some old fill that filled the gully up. In the lower mainland, we get these beautiful lacustrines and nice windblown sands at 300 to 400 meters in elevation. It's pure sand. You think you're sitting on the beach. And these things are kind of hidden out there. So knowing what you're getting into, sometimes things do get missed, and it's unfortunate, but just knowing and looking at those old roads and what you're walking into yourself is something good to be aware of. The activation prescriptions can take a variety of looks and types of detailed work that go into them. Sometimes it just be a matter of putting a note on the map that all culverts need to be removed. Sometimes you get into an area where, in this case, the terrain stability assessment picked up an old landslide, so that's good information to be aware of when you're doing your prescription, how you're managing water into that area. What are you doing with some potential blankets and coarse rock and some French drains? How does that relate into the prescription afterwards, or you got more descriptions and you can feed the operator back to a location in a report? If there's landslides that have occurred, all that is good information for the operator to be aware of and some potential challenges that they might find themselves in when they're doing the works. And then supervision, while you're into these areas, you might want to put a little more attention to them. You've got some old landslides, you've got some new landslides, you've got all kinds of funny, more complicated work going on. So you might want to plan to be out here more often, whether it's a coordinating member that put out the prescription, the terrain stability professional, and the supervisor as well. Then time of year that you're in there, and so on, doing the type of work. You might have rainfall shutdown criteria that's reduced for doing this work as well. So some of our key messages here. The activation prescription should be developed by a qualified professional. in the right instances. It doesn't need to be all the time, but just to put a note in the contract that contractors responsible for deactivating the road may not be enough. There are conformance statements. If you go back into the guidelines by the association, it does speak to deactivation and the need for professional work, and if professional work is done, then conformance statements done afterwards. And stop if you don't know, if you see unforeseen conditions. Sometimes the operators will be out there and they'll find something that happened during construction that wasn't planned. You know, the person doing the prescription think that they might be in a full bench end hall, and the operator starts digging up woody debris on the outside edge, and it's like, okay, well, everybody missed it through all the different phases, and now this operator's finding it. So you know, they may need to stop, and prescriptions may need to change accordingly. And you have changed circumstances. Sometimes, you know, if you're doing the prescription in the middle of summer and the operator's out there in November, water is very different at that time of year. So just something to be aware of. Road inspections. This can take a variety of looks. You know, some of the companies have their EMS and have checklists available for the road inspections to be done. Sometimes the supervisors are doing this. Things that they typically look at is the safety, right-of-ways, the road prism, drainage structures, and things that people keep an eye on for the worker safety. So a variety of, you know, this can take any kind of fashion of the operator or even the supervisors doing the work out there. Sometimes the inspections are done by professionals for a variety of reasons. Maybe there's some special road construction techniques that had to take place, and then you want to have somebody look at that just because you know it's going to be very sensitive, and depending on the time of year, you may want to be out there because you've built a French drain in the road with drainage pipes, and you want to make sure that the drainage pipes are working like this time of year, and you want to make sure that things aren't getting plugged and so on. So there could be a variety of reasons why professionals might get out and do inspections, but this is probably not the norm, so it's something to just be aware of.
So Gino, these inspections could be done by a non-professional though.
Oh, totally, and they probably, large majority of the time, is done by just people driving down the roads, right, as part of their regular day-to-day work.
But I think the big thing is the document like this actually be provided saying that road inspection has been done and meets conformance.
Yeah, you probably see.
Yeah. Whoever does it and it signs it, and that's in the files. Yeah. Excuse me. It'll get you out of some tough stuff.
Yeah, it shows good due diligence as well, so that you're actually carrying out inspections. So, yeah, that's just something to be aware of.
No, it really was September. We really are.
So, closing the loop, this is where the feedback happens. We want to make sure that, you know, if you see stuff in inspections, should probably, he can go outside. Sorry, we waited for you to get off the phone there.
Sorry. The door opens too.
Yeah, I don't think the alarm went very good.
Yeah.
So the inspections, there's conformance statements if there's a need for that, as well as the organizational structure. You might find a variety of people doing those kinds of things and the work that's out there. So closing the loop, like Del was saying, if you have the paperwork, and then making sure the results of those inspections get out to the people that need to know. Sometimes it's not because people are actively busy and working in those areas, but maybe for the next phase that's coming in, there's silviculture works and so on that occurs and goes on. So if you have any maintenance issues, then that's how one can feed the information back to the roads foreman and make sure that inspections and work gets done. So sometimes, you know, things do go sideways. And you got to remember the guidelines are there for us as professionals, and if you can indicate that you've followed those, that's how we show that we've done our due diligence, and that's what you're going to get measured at or measured against by WorkSafe and the associations as well. So if you're going to deviate from the guidelines, you probably want to have some rationale for that and explain a little bit how you're deviating and what you're doing. But it's just good professional practice. Yes?
Are there guidelines that say, Dal was saying, well, anybody might do this. Are there guidelines that give fairly strong indications of who should be doing it, under which conditions?
I don't think it gets into what conditions. It's more if it's professional practice, and then it comes back to the Foresters Act and the Ag BC Act and requirements for the professional work to be done by RFTs, RPFs, or PNGs, PGOs. I think it comes down to the licensees and to make that determination, whoever's looking at that issue, to determine if they need to have the right professionals out there. It's really their call because they're the ones asking for people to come out, right?
But do they have, is there any guidance to those people?
Not that I'm aware of.
Some of that comes down to your scope of practice, and I'm an RFT, so I'm fairly low on the food chain, I would say, but just because I'm an RFT for 22 years doesn't mean I know everything all RFTs know. So it's up to you as a professional to make sure it's your scope, and if you get asked to do things that aren't, you have to say no and find somebody who is. So I don't think it is as well defined as you're asking, but each person needs to know their scope, that's for sure.
Yeah, under FERPA you have the different values, and like thou shalt not create landslides and things like that, right? So it comes down to professional to professional and making sure, but the days of if something happens, under the Forest Practices Code and you must bring out a PGO or a PNG, that's not there today. We've moved away from that. And professional reliance is out there too, yeah.
Well, the reason I asked is, I've been doing the last decade and a half work down Washington State as much as up here, so I'm a little unfamiliar, but I saw situations down there where foresters were doing this work. Everybody, they all thought that was fine because there was no guidance as to what kind of conditions really you should be getting someone else. And so you'd walk along these roads that have been said, this is fine by a forester.
Yeah.
And you went, oh no, it is not.
Yeah. Yeah, the guidelines get into what type of experience that you have and whether you can do that type of work. But again, it's up to that individual to make that decision. It doesn't go into black and white into different instances. Not to say that things aren't going to change. I know this government's got professional reliance on their radar, and those conversations are happening. So the associations are also tasked right now through the Forest Practices Board audit to have another look at their guidelines based on the results that they had found. So we're waiting to hear what the associations are going to say on that. I think the associations are supposed to get back to the Forest Practices Board here in December, if I believe it's December anyways. So yeah, stay tuned. There can be some changes coming down the pipe here. But for now, it's professional reliance, and it's up to licensees to make sure they're doing their due diligence and getting the right people out in the field. Going to touch base a little bit on technology. We talked slightly about this. Definitely, as we noted, LiDAR, it's not necessarily new technology, but it's becoming more available to people. You got to know the limitations, and even the LiDAR, you'll get different quality LiDAR. Flying and just shooting a laser down to the ground and into the canopy is one thing. Having software, and a lot of those companies have proprietary software that will actually tell you, your shots and whether you've actually hit ground or not. If you're getting into areas where sunlight is not hitting the ground when you're out there in the summer, the laser's not getting through neither. So what you think you might be getting is a ground shot, and if you're into some real thick salal or salmonberry, you might not be looking at LiDAR. What the LiDAR is telling you is ground. It might not be ground in the field. So something to be aware of. Steep slopes as well. You'll get different returns. are you hitting a rock bluff or are you hitting branch, and you really want to do your ground review with the LiDAR in hand and make sure that things add up. In-cab technology, there's definitely some people that are starting to work. I've heard of a lot of people saying, yeah, operators have their iPhones. The iPads are a little bit bigger. Things are getting out there. But again, there's accuracy with those things. And there's tools and gadgets you can attach to the iPad to make them a little more accurate. But you got to be aware of your limitations on those tools. The drones are becoming very big. Whether you're doing as-builts with drones and comparing it to your design, that technology is coming online very, very quickly. So there's a lot more of that getting done. So just again, there's limitations with those kinds of things. We did mention PDF Avenza. FP Innovations have their what they call FP DAT. That's a software that monitors a variety of things, whether it's production, equipment conditions, maintenance, and so on. It does a lot more than just putting you on the dot on the map. So there's a variety of tools there as well, and navigation might be a little more accurate. I have not personally worked with FP DAT, but you probably have a satellite cone on top of your machine, your cab, that might put you in better accuracy than what you would get with the PDF Avenza and the iPads. And just to note a couple things like Google Earth, sometimes people do use that as a tool. The imagery in Google Earth is getting a lot better out there these days, and different periods as well. So you can go back in time and look at that. Plus, you can use that with your aerial photos and your history, and that can give you a lot of good information. But one key thing here, especially the young kids coming out of school, they'll walk out there with just an iPad, and I swear we'll hear one day that somebody got lost. They didn't have a compass and didn't know how to work a compass in the bush. So anyways, there's nothing like the good old compass you pull out of your vest and know where you're walking, and have a paper map too. So anyways, for the young kids out there, they love the technology, but take it away from them, they might get lost. Communication, just quickly touch base. Most people are using the company radios, but Spot has a variety of tools out there, whether it's just you need help or you can indicate you're safe, or you can send text. Same with satellite phones and cell phones. You don't get a lot of coverage, but it depends where you are. If you're into the lower mainline, you probably get better coverage than compared to Bella Bella and Bella Coola. Amazingly enough, when I was flying in the Central Coast, I was getting cell coverage up in Bella Coola area and Bella Bella, sometimes out of some towers. So it was kind of weird and interesting. So in conclusion, we're really here because the construction-initiated slides continue to occur. And unless we do change our behavior, they will still occur. So the challenge here for everybody is to as their take home, what can you do better, whether it's communication all the way down to the operator, get out in the field a little more during construction, and what can you change to make sure that whether it's just the pre-works, and you're involved a little more with the pre-works and be able to give out the key messages out. So everybody can probably do something a little different to try to reduce the likelihood of one of those slides from occurring. And based on your expertise and your exposure, your team is the key and able to make the lasting positive change. So what we're trying to avoid is obviously these excavators going down and being upside down in the mud. Not a good situation, and machines sliding down while we're building a road.